The Professor Part 2 by Charlotte Brontë. Chapter 21. Directly as I closed the door, I saw laid on the table 2 letters. My thought was that they were notes of invitation from the friends of some of my pupils. I had received such marks of attention occasionally, and with me, who had no friends, correspondence of more interest was out of the question. The postman's arrival had never yet been an event of interest to me since I came to Brussels. I laid my hand carelessly on the documents, and coldly and slowly glancing at them, I prepared to break the seals. My eye was arrested, and my hand too. I saw what excited me, as if I had found a vivid picture where I expected only to discover a blank page. On one cover was an English postmark. On the other, a lady's clear, fine autograph. The last I opened first. Mon dieu, I found out what you had done the very morning after your visit to me. You might be in my room for a week, and as ferry money is not current in Brussels, I could not doubt who left the 20 francs on the chimney-piece. I thought I heard you stir the vase when I was stooping to look for your glove under the table, and I wondered you should imagine it had got into such a little cup. Now, monsieur, the money is not mine, and I shall not keep it. I will not send it in this note because it might be lost. Besides, it is heavy, but I will restore it to you the first time I see you, and you must make no difficulties about taking it, because in the first place I am sure, monsieur, you can understand that one likes to pay one's debts, that it is satisfactory to owe no man anything, and in the second place, I can now very well afford to be honest, as I am provided with a situation. This last circumstance is, indeed, the reason of my writing to you, for it is pleasant to communicate good news, and in these days I have only my master to whom I can tell anything. A week ago, monsieur, I was sent for by a Mrs. Wharton, an English lady. Her eldest daughter was going to be married, and some rich relation having made her a present of a veil and dress in costly old lace, as precious, they said, almost as jewels, but a little damaged by time, I was commissioned to put them in repair. I had to do it at the house. They gave me, besides, some embroidery to complete, and nearly a week elapsed before I had finished everything. While I worked, Miss Wharton often came into the room and sat with me, and so did Mrs. Wharton. They made me talk English, asked how I had learned to speak it so well. Then they inquired what I knew besides what books I had read. Soon they seemed to make a sort of wonder of me, considering me no doubt as a learned grisette. One afternoon, Mrs. Wharton brought in a Parisian lady to test the accuracy of my knowledge of French. The result of it was that, owing probably in a great degree to the mother's and daughter's good humor about the marriage, which inclined them to do beneficent deeds, and partly, I think, because they are naturally benevolent people, they decided that the wish I had expressed to do something more than Mandelace was a very legitimate one, and the same day they took me in their carriage to Mrs. D's, who was the directress of the first English school at Brussels. It seemed she happened to be in want of a French lady to give lessons in geography, history, grammar, and composition in the French language. Mrs. Wharton recommended me very warmly, and as 2 of her younger daughters are pupils in the house, her patronage availed to get me the place. It was settled that I am to attend 6 hours daily, for, happily, it was not required that I should live in the house. I should have been sorry to leave my lodgings, and for this Mrs. D. will give me 1,200 francs per annum. You see, therefore, monsieur, that I am now rich, richer almost than I ever hoped to be. I feel thankful for it, especially as my sight was beginning to be injured by constant working at fine lace, and I was getting, too, very weary of sitting up late at nights and yet not being able to find time for reading or study. I began to fear that I should fall ill and be unable to pay my way. This fear is now in a great measure removed, and, in truth, monsieur, I am very grateful to God for the relief, and I feel it necessary almost to speak of my happiness to someone who is kind-hearted enough to derive joy from seeing others joyful. I could not therefore resist the temptation of writing to you. I argued with myself, it is very pleasant for me to write, and it will not be exactly painful, though it may be tiresome to Monsieur to read. Do not be too angry with my circumlocution and inelegancies of expression. And believe me, your attached pupil, F.E. Henry. Having read this letter, I mused on its contents for a few moments, whether with sentiments pleasurable or otherwise, I will hereafter note, and then took up the other. It was directed in a hand to me unknown, small, and rather neat, neither masculine nor exactly feminine. The seal bore a coat of arms concerning which I could only decipher that it was not that of the Seacombe family. Consequently, the epistle could be from none of my almost forgotten, and certainly quite forgetting patrician relations. From whom, then, was it? I removed the envelope. The note folded within ran as follows: I have no doubt in the world that you are doing well in that greasy Flanders, living probably on the fat of the unctuous land, sitting like a black-haired, tawny-skinned, long-nosed Israelite by the flesh-pots of Egypt, or like a rascally son of Levi near the brass cauldrons of the sanctuary, and every now and then plunging in a consecrated hook and drawing out of the sea of Brost. I know this because you never write to anyone in England. Thankless dog that you are! I, by the sovereign efficacy of my recommendation, got you the place where you are now living in clover, and yet not a word of gratitude or even acknowledgment have you ever offered in return. But I am coming to see you, and small conception can you, with your addled aristocratic brains, form of the sort of moral kicking I have, ready packed in my carpet bag, destined to be presented to you immediately on my arrival. Meantime, I know all about your affairs, and have just got information by Brown's last letter that you are said to be on the point of forming an advantageous match with a pursy little Belgian schoolmistress, Kiel, Zainobi, or some such name. Won't I have a look at her when I come over? And this you may rely on, if she pleases my taste, or if I think it worth while in a pecuniary point of view, I'll pounce on your prize and bear her away triumphant in spite of your teeth. Yet I don't like dumpies either, and Brown says she is little and stout the better fitted for a wiry, starved-looking chap like you. Be on the lookout, for you know neither the day nor hour when I don't wish to blaspheme, so I'll leave a blank cometh. Yours truly, Hunst and Yorkiehanston. Hung, said I, and ere I laid the letter down, I again glanced at the small, neat handwriting. Not a bit like that of a mercantile man, nor indeed of any man except Hunston himself. They talk of affinities between the autograph and the character. What affinity was there here? I recalled the writer's peculiar face and certain traits I suspected, rather than knew, to appertain to his nature, and I answered, a great deal. Hunston, then, was coming to Brussels, and coming I knew not when, coming charged with the expectation of finding me on the summit of prosperity, about to be married, to step into a warm nest, to lie comfortably down by the side of a snug, well-fed little mate. I wish him joy of the fidelity of the picture he has painted, thought I. What will he say when, instead of a pair of plump turtle doves, billing and cooing in a bower of roses, he finds a single lean cormorant, standing mateless and shelterless on poverty's bleak cliff? Oh, confound him! Let him come, and let him laugh at the contrast between rumor and fact. Were he the devil himself, instead of being merely very like him, I'd not condescend to get out of his way, or to forge a smile or a cheerful word wherewith to avert his sarcasm. Then I recurred to the other letter, that struck a chord whose sound I could not deaden by thrusting my fingers into my ears, for it vibrated within, and though its swell might be exquisite music, its cadence was a groan. That Frances was relieved from the pressure of want, that the curse of excessive labor was taken off her, filled me with happiness, that her first thought in prosperity should be to augment her joy by sharing it with me, met and satisfied the wish of my heart. 2 results of her letter were then pleasant, sweet as 2 draughts of nectar, but applying my lips for the 3rd time to the cup, and they were excoriated as with vinegar and gall. 2 persons whose desires are moderate may live well enough in Brussels on an income which would scarcely afford a respectable maintenance for one in London, and that, not because the necessaries of life are so much dearer in the latter capital, or taxes so much higher than in the former, but because the English surpass in folly all the nations on God's earth, and are more abject slaves to custom, to opinion, to the desire to keep up a certain appearance, than the Italians are to priestcraft, the French the vain, the riotous, the quiescenti. I've seen a degree of sense in the modest arrangement of one homely Belgian household that might put to shame the elegance, the superfluities, the luxuries, the strained refinements of 100 genteel English mansions. In Belgium, provided you can make money, you may save it. This is scarcely possible in England. Ostentation there lavishes in a month what industry has earned in a year. More shame to all classes in that most. Bountiful and beggarly country for their servile following of fashion. I could write a chapter or 2 on this subject, but must forbear, at least for the present. Had I retained my sixtiel per annum, I could, now that Frances was in possession of fiftiel, have gone straight to her this very evening and spoken out the words which, repressed, kept fretting my heart with fever. Our united income would, as we should have managed it, have sufficed well for our mutual support. Since we lived in a country where economy was not confounded with meanness, where frugality in dress, food, and furniture was not synonymous with vulgarity in these various points. But the placeless usher, bare of resource and unsupported by connections, must not think of this. Such a sentiment as love, such a word as marriage, were misplaced in his heart and on his lips. Now for the first time did I truly feel what it was to be poor. Now did the sacrifice I had made in casting from me the means of living put on a new aspect. Instead of a correct, just, honorable act, it seemed a deed at once light and fanatical. I took several turns. In my room, under the goading influence of most poignant remorse, I walked a quarter of an hour from the wall to the window, and at the window, self-reproach seemed to face me. At the wall, self-disdain. All at once outspoke conscience. "Down, stupid tormentors," cried she. "The man has done his duty. You shall not bait him thus by thoughts of what might have been. He relinquished a temporary and contingent good to avoid a permanent and certain evil. He did well. Let him reflect now, and when your blinding dust and deafening hum subside, he will discover a path." I sat down. I propped my forehead on both my hands. I thought and thought, an hour, 2 hours. Vainly. I seemed like one sealed in a subterranean vault, who gazes at utter blackness, ensured by yard-thick stone walls around, and by piles of building above, expecting light to penetrate through granite, and through cement firm as granite. But there are chinks, or there may be chinks, in the best adjusted masonry. There was a chink in my cavernous cell, for eventually I saw, or seemed to see, a ray pallid indeed, and cold and doubtful, but still a ray, for it showed that narrow path which conscience had promised after 2-3 hours torturing research in brain and memory. I disinterred certain remains of circumstances, and conceived a hope that by putting them together an expedient might be framed, and a restore hired. The circumstances were briefly these: some 3 months ago Pellet had, on the occasion of his fete, given the boys a treat, which treat consisted in a party of pleasure to a certain place of public resort in the outskirts of Brussels, of which I do not at this moment remember the name, but near it were several of those lakelets called étangs, and there was one étang, larger than the rest, where on holidays people were accustomed to amuse themselves by rowing round it in little boats, the boys having eaten an unlimited quantity of gaufres and drank several bottles of Louvain beer amid the shades of a garden made and provided for such crams, petitioned the director for leave to take a row on the étang. Half a dozen of the eldest succeeded in obtaining leave, and I was commissioned to accompany them as surveillant. Among the half dozen happened to be a certain Jean-Baptiste Vandenhuten, a most ponderous young Flamand, not tall, but even now, at the early age of 16, possessing a breadth and depth of personal development truly national. It chanced that Jean was the first lad to step into the boat. He stumbled, rolled to one side, the boat revolted at his weight and capsized. Vandenhuten sank like lead, rose, sank again. My coat and waistcoat were off in an instant. I had not been brought up at Eton and boated and bathed and swam there 10 long years for nothing. It was a natural and easy act for me to leap to the rescue. The lads and the boatmen yelled. They thought there would be 2 deaths by drowning instead of 1, but as Jean rose the 3rd time, I clutched him by one leg and they collar, and in 3 minutes more both he and I were safe landed. To speak heaven's truth, my merit in the action was small indeed, for I had run no risk, and subsequently did not even catch cold from the wetting. But when May Miss and Madame Vandenhuten, of whom Jean Baptiste was the sole hope, came to hear of the exploit, they seemed to think I had evinced a bravery and devotion which no thanks could sufficiently repay. Madame, in particular, was certain I must have dearly loved their sweet son, or I would not thus have hazarded my own life to save his. Monsieur, an honest-looking, though phlegmatic man, said very little, but he would not suffer me to leave the room till I had promised that in case I ever stood in need of help, I would, by applying to him, give him a chance of discharging the obligation under which he affirmed I had laid him. These words, then, were my glimmer of light. It was here I found my sole outlet, and in truth, though the cold light roused, it did not cheer me, nor did the outlet seem such as I should like to pass through. Right. I had none to M. Vandenhuten's good offices. It was not on the ground of merit I could apply to him. No, I must stand on that of necessity. I had no work. I wanted work. My best chance of obtaining it lay in securing his recommendation. This I knew could be had by asking for it, not to ask, because the request revolted my pride and contradicted my habits, would, I felt, be an indulgence of false and indolent fastidiousness. I might repent the omission all my life. I would not then be guilty of it. That evening I went to Mim. Vandenhuten's, but I had bent the bow and adjusted the shaft in vain. The string broke. I rang the bell at the great door. It was a large, handsome house in an expensive part of the town. A manservant opened. I asked for M. Vandenhuten. Vandenhuten and family were all out of town, gone to Ostend, did not know when they would be back. I left my card and retraced my steps. Chapter 22. A week is gone. Le jour des noces arrived. The marriage was solemnized at Saint Jacques, Montclair. Zoraide became Madame Pelet, nee Reuter, and, in about an hour after this transformation, the happy pair, as newspapers phrase it, were on their way to Paris, where, according to previous arrangement, the honeymoon was to be spent. The next day I quitted the pensionnat. Myself and my chattels, some books and clothes were soon transferred to a modest lodging I had hired in a street not far off. In half an hour my clothes were arranged in a commode, my books on a shelf, and the flitting was effected. I should not have been unhappy that day had not one pang tortured me, a longing to go to the Rue Notre Dame aux Neiges, resisted yet irritated by an inward resolve to avoid that street till such time as the mist of doubt should clear from my prospects. It was a sweet September evening, very mild, very still. I had nothing to do. At that hour I knew Frances would be equally released from occupation. I thought she might possibly be wishing for her master. I knew I wished for my pupil. Imagination began with her low whispers, infusing into my soul the soft tale of pleasures that might be. "You will find her reading or writing," said she. "You can take your seat at her side. You need not startle her peace by undue excitement. You need not embarrass her manner by unusual action or language. Be as you always are. Look over what she has written. Listen while she reads. Chide her or quietly approve. You know the effect of either system. You know her smile when pleased. You know the play of her looks when roused. You have the secret of awakening what expression you will, and you can choose amongst that pleasant variety. With you, she will sit silent as long as it suits you to talk alone. You can hold her under a potent spell. Intelligent as she is, eloquent as she can be, you can seal her lips and veil her bright countenance with diffidence. Yet, you know, she is not all monotonous mildness. You have seen, with a sort of strange pleasure, revolt, scorn, austerity, bitterness, lay energetic claim to a place in her feelings and physiognomy. You know that few could rule her as you do. You know she might break, but never bend under the hand of tyranny and injustice. But reason and affection can guide her by a sign. Try their influence now. Go, they are not passions. You may handle them safely. "I will not go," was my answer to the sweet temptress. A man is master of himself to a certain point, but not beyond it. Could I seek Frances tonight? Could I sit with her alone in a quiet room, and address her only in the language of reason and affection? No, was the brief fervent reply of that love which had conquered and now controlled me. Time seemed to stagnate, the sun would not go down, my watch ticked, but I thought the hands were paralyzed. "What a hot evening!" I cried, throwing open the lattice, for indeed I had seldom felt so feverish. Hearing a step ascending the common stair, I wondered whether the locataire now mounting to his apartments were as unsettled in mind and condition as I was, or whether he lived in the calm of certain resources and in the freedom of unfettered feelings. What? Was he coming in person to solve the problem hardly proposed in inaudible thought? He had actually knocked at the door, at my door, a smart, prompt rap, and, almost before I could invite him in, he was over the threshold and had closed the door behind him. "And how are you?" asked in a different, quiet voice in the English language, while my visitor, without any sort of bustle or introduction, put his hat on the table and his gloves into his hat, and drawing the only armchair the room afforded a little forward, seated himself tranquilly therein. "Can't you speak?" he inquired in a few moments, in a tone whose nonchalance seemed to intimate that it was much the same thing whether I answered or not. The fact is, I found it desirable to have recourse to my good friends les besicles. not exactly to ascertain the identity of my visitor, for I already knew him, confound his impudence, but to see how he looked, to get a clear notion of his mind and countenance. I wiped the glasses very deliberately and put them on quite as deliberately, adjusting them so as not to hurt the bridge of my nose or get entangled in my short tufts of dun hair. I was sitting in the window seat with my back to the light, and I had him visix essicassen. He would much rather have had reversed, for at any time he preferred scrutinizing to being scrutinized. Yes, it was H.E., and no mistake, with his 6 feet of length arranged in a sitting attitude, with his dark traveling surtout with its velvet collar, his gray pantaloons, his black stock, and his face, the most original one nature ever modeled, yet the least obtrusively so. Not one feature that could be termed marked or odd, yet the effect of the whole unique. There is no use in attempting to describe what is indescribable. Being in no hurry to address him, I sat and stared at my ease. "Oh, that's your game, is it?" said he at last. "Well, we'll see which is soonest tired." And he slowly drew out a fine cigar case, picked one to his taste, lit it, took a book from the shelf convenient to his hand, then leaning back, proceeded to smoke and read as tranquilly as if he had been in his own room, in Grove Street, Shire, England. I knew he was capable of continuing in that attitude till midnight if he conceived the whim, so I rose, and taking the book from his hand, I said, "You did not ask for it, and you shall not have it." "It is silly and dull," he observed, "so I have not lost much." Then the spell being broken, he went on, "I thought you lived at Pelots. I went there this afternoon." Expecting to be starved to death by sitting in a boarding school drawing room, and they told me you were gone, had departed this morning. You had left your address behind you, though, which I wondered at. It was a more practical and sensible precaution than I should have imagined you capable of. Why did you leave? Because Impala has just married the lady whom you and Mr. Brown assigned to me as my wife. "Oh, indeed," replied Hunsden with a short laugh. "So you've lost both your wife and your place?" "Precisely so." I saw him give a quick, covert glance all round my room. He marked its narrow limits, its scanty furniture. In an instant he had comprehended the state of matters, had absolved me from the crime of prosperity. A curious effect this discovery wrought in his strange mind. I am morally certain that if he had found me installed in a handsome parlor, lounging on a soft couch, with a pretty, wealthy wife at my side, he would have hated me. A brief, cold, haughty visit would in such a case have been the extreme limit of his civilities, and never would he have come near me more, so long as the tide of fortune bore me smoothly on its surface. But the painted furniture, the bare walls, the cheerless solitude of my rooms. "You have got another place?" "No." "You're in the way of getting one." "No. That is bad. Have you applied to Brown?" "No, indeed. You had better. He often has it in his power to give useful information in such matters. He served me once very well. I have no claim on him, and am not in the humor to bother him again. Oh, if you're bashful and dread being intrusive, you need only commission me. I shall see him tonight. I can put in a word." "I beg you will not, Mr. Hunsden. I am in your debt already. You did me an important service when I was at X. Got me out of a den where I was dying. That service I had never repaid, and at present I decline positively adding another item to the account. If the wind sits that way, I'm satisfied. I thought my unexampled generosity in turning you out of that accursed counting-house would be duly appreciated some day. Cast your bread on the waters, and it shall be found after many days, say the Scriptures. Yes, that's right, lad. Make much of me. I'm a nonpareil. There's nothing like me in the common herd. In the meantime, to put all humbug aside and talk sense for a few moments, you would be greatly the better of a situation, and what is more, you are a fool if you refuse to take one from any hand that offers it. Very well, Mr. Hunsden. Now you have settled that point. Talk of something else. What news from X? I have not settled that point, or at least there is another to settle before we get to X. Is this Miss Zenobe Zoraide? Interposed I. Well, Zoraide, is she really married to Pilette? I tell you yes, and if you don't believe me, go and ask the cure of Saint Jacques. And your heart is broken. I am not aware that it is. It feels all right, beats as usual. Then your feelings are less superfine than I took them to be. You must be a coarse, callous character to bear such a thwack without staggering under it. Staggering under it? What the deuce is there to stagger under in the circumstance of a Belgian schoolmistress marrying a French schoolmaster? The progeny will doubtless be a strange hybrid race, but that's their lookout, not mine. He indulges in scurrilous jests, and the bride was his affianced one. Who said so? Brown. I'll tell you what, Hunsden, Brown is an old gossip. He is. But in the meantime, if his gossip be founded on less than fact, if you took no particular interest in Miss Zoraide, why, O youthful pedagogue, did you leave your place in consequence of her becoming Madame Pellet? Because I felt my face grow a little hot, because in short, Mr. Hunsden, I decline answering any more questions, and I plunged my hands deep in my breeches pocket. Hunsden triumphed. His eyes, his laugh announced victory. What the deuce are you laughing at, Mr. Hunsden? At your exemplary composure. Well, lad, I'll not bore you. I see how it is. Zoraide has jilted you, married someone richer, as any sensible woman would have done if she had had the chance. I made no reply. I let him think so, not feeling inclined to enter into an explanation of the real state of things, and as little to forge a false account. But it was not easy to blind Hunsden. My very silence, instead of convincing him that he had hit the truth, seemed to render him doubtful about it. He went on. I suppose the affair has been conducted as such affairs always are. Amongst rational people, you offered her youth and your talents, such as they are, in exchange for her position and money. I don't say talk. I'd say it. She, having then no chance of making a better bargain, was at first inclined to come to terms with you, but Pellet, the head of a flourishing school, stepped in with a higher bid. She accepted, and he has got her. A correct transaction, perfectly so businesslike and legitimate. And now we'll talk of something else. Do, said I, very glad to dismiss the topic, and especially glad to have baffled the sagacity of my cross-questioner, if indeed I had baffled it, for though his words now led away from the dangerous point, his eyes, keen and watchful, seemed still preoccupied with the former idea. You want to hear news from X? And what interest can you have in X? You left no friends there, for you made none. Nobody ever asks after you, neither man nor woman. And if I mention your name in company, the men look as if I had spoken of Prester John, and the women sneer covertly. Our ex-belles must have disliked you. How did you excite their displeasure? I don't know. I seldom spoke to them. They were nothing to me. I considered them only as something to be glanced at from a distance. Their dresses and faces were often pleasing enough to the eye, but I could not understand their conversation, nor even read their countenances. When I caught snatches of what they said, I could never make much of it, and the play of their lips and eyes did not help me at all. That was your fault, not theirs. There are sensible as well as handsome women in XE. Women it is worth any man's while to talk to, and with whom I can talk with pleasure. But you had and have no pleasant address. There is nothing in you to induce a woman to be affable. I have remarked you sitting near the door in a room full of company, bent on hearing, not on speaking, on observing, not on entertaining, looking frigidly shy at the commencement of a party, confusingly vigilant about the middle, and insultingly weary towards the end. Is that the way, do you think, ever to communicate pleasure or excite interest? No. And if you are generally unpopular, it is because you deserve to be so. Content! I ejaculated. No, you are not content. You see beauty always turning its back on you. You are mortified and then you sneer. I verily believe all that is desirable on earth will. Reputation, love will forever to you be the ripe grapes on the high trellis. You'll look up at them, they will tantalize in you the lust of the eye, but they are out of reach. You have not the address to fetch a ladder, and you'll go away calling them sour. Cutting as these words might have been under some circumstances, they drew no blood now. My life was changed. My experience had been varied since I left X, but Hunsden could not know this. He had seen me only in the character of Mr. Crimsworth's clerk, a dependent amongst wealthy strangers, meeting disdain with a hard front, conscious of an unsocial and unattractive exterior. Refusing to sue for notice which I was sure would be withheld, declining to evince an admiration which I knew would be scorned as worthless. He could not be aware that since then youth and loveliness had been to me everyday objects, that I had studied them at leisure and closely, and had seen the plain texture of truth under the embroidery of appearance. Nor could he, keen-sighted as he was, penetrate into my heart, search my brain, and read my peculiar sympathies and antipathies. He had not known me long enough, or well enough, to perceive how low my show high, how fast they would flow the underbrin flaconstituent the. Neither could he suspect for an instant the history of my communications with McClellan Reuter. Secret to him and to all others was the tale of her strange infatuation. Her blandishments, her wiles had been seen, but by me, and to me only were they known. But they had changed me, for they had proved that I could impress. A. Sweeter secret nestled deeper in my heart, one full of tenderness and as full of strength. It took the sting out of Hunsden's sarcasm. It kept me unbit by shame and unstirred by wrath. But of all this I could say nothing, decisive at least. Uncertainty sealed my lips, and during the interval of silence by which alone I replied to Mr. Hunsden, I made up my mind to be for the present wholly misjudged by him. And misjudged I was. He thought he had been rather too hard upon me, and that I was crushed by the weight of his upbraidings. So to reassure me he said, doubtless I should mend some day. I was only at the beginning of life yet, and since happily I was not quite without sense, every will be a good to me. Just then I turned my face a little to the light. The approach of twilight and my position in the window seat had for the last 10 minutes prevented him from studying my countenance. As I moved, however, he caught an expression which he thus interpreted. Confound it, how doggedly self-approving the lad looks. I thought he was fit to die with shame. And there he sits, grinning smiles, as good as to say, let the world wag as it will. I've the philosopher's stone in my waistcoat pocket and the elixir of life in my cupboard. I'm independent of both fate and fortune. Hunsden, you spoke of grapes. I was thinking of a fruit I like better than your ex-hothouse grapes. An unique fruit, growing wild, which I have marked as my own, and hope one day to gather and taste. It is of no use your offering me the draught of bitterness, or threatening me with death by thirst. I have the anticipation of sweetness on my palate, the hope of freshness on my lips. I can reject the unsavory and endure the exhausting. For how long? Till the next opportunity for effort, and as the prize of success will be a treasure after my own heart, I'll bring a bull's strength to the struggle. Bad luck crushes bulls as easily as bullaces. And, I believe, the fury dogs you. You were born with a wooden spoon in your mouth, depend on it. I believe you, and I mean to make my wooden spoon do the work of some people's silver ladles. Grasped firmly and handled nimbly, even a wooden spoon will shovel up wrath. Hunsden rose. I see, said he. I suppose you're one of those who develop best unwatched and act best unaided, work your own way. Now, I'll go. And, without another word, he was going. At the door he turned. Crimsworth Hall is sold, said he. Sold, was my echo. Yes, you know, of course, that your brother failed 3 months ago. What, Edward Crimsworth? Precisely. And his wife went home to her father's. When affairs went awry, his temper sympathized with them. He used her ill. I told you he would be a tyrant to her some day. As to him, what has become of him? Nothing extraordinary, don't be alarmed. He put himself under the protection of the court, compounded with his creditors 10 pence in the pound. In 6 weeks set up again, coaxed back his wife, and is flourishing like a green bay tree. And Crimsworth Hall was the furniture sold too? Everything from the grand piano down to the rolling pin. And the contents of the oak dining room were they sold? Of course. Why should the sofas and chairs of that room be held more sacred than those of any other? And the pictures? What pictures? Crimsworth had no special collection that I know of. He did not profess to be an amateur. There were 2 portraits, one on each side the mantelpiece. You cannot have forgotten them, Mr. Hunsden. You once noticed that of the lady. Oh, I know. The thin-faced gentlewoman with a shawl, put on like drapery. Why, as a matter of course, it would be sold among the other things. If you had been rich, you might have bought it, for I remember you said it represented your mother. You see what it is to be without a sou. I did. But surely, I thought to myself, I shall not always be so poverty. Stricken, I may one day buy it back yet. Who purchased it, do you know? I asked. How is it likely? I never inquired who purchased anything. There spoke the unpractical man to imagine all the world is interested in what interests himself. Now, good night. I'm off for Germany tomorrow morning. I shall be back here in 6 weeks, and possibly I may call and see you again. I wonder whether you'll be still out of place. He laughed as mockingly, as heartlessly as Mephistopheles, and so laughing, vanished. Some people, however indifferent they may become after a considerable space of absence, always contrive to leave a pleasant impression just at parting. Not so Hunsden. A conference with him affected one like a draught of Peruvian bark. It seemed the concentration of the specially harsh, stringent, bitter, whether, like bark, it invigorated, I scarcely knew. A ruffled mind makes a restless pillow. I slept little on the night after this interview. Towards morning I began to doze, but hardly had my slumber become sleep when I was roused from it by hearing a noise in my sitting room, to which my bedroom adjoined a step, and a shoving of furniture. The movement lasted barely 2 minutes. With the closing of the door it ceased. I listened. Not a mouse stirred. Perhaps I had dreamt it. Perhaps a locataire had made a mistake and entered my apartment instead of his own. It was yet but 5 o'clock. Neither I nor the day were wide awake. I turned and was soon unconscious. When I did rise, about 2 hours later, I had forgotten the circumstance. The first thing I saw, however, on quitting my chamber, recalled it. Just pushed in at the door of my sitting room, and still standing on end, was a wooden packing case, a rough deal affair, wide but shallow. A porter had doubtless shoved it forward, but seeing no occupant of the room, had left it at the entrance. That is none of mine, thought I, approaching. It must be meant for somebody else. I stooped to examine the address. Crimsworth, Esq., No. St. Brussels. I was puzzled, but concluding that the best way to obtain information was to ask within, I cut the cords and opened the case. Green baize enveloped its contents, sewn carefully at the sides. I ripped the pack thread with my penknife, and still, as the seam gave way, glimpses of gilding appeared through the widening interstices. Boards and baize being at length removed, I lifted from the case a large picture in a magnificent frame, leaning it against a chair, in a position where the light from the window fell favorably upon it. I stepped back already. I had mounted my spectacles. A portrait painter's sky, the most somber and threatening of welkins, and distant trees of a conventional depth of hue, raised in full relief a pale, pensive-looking female face, shadowed with soft, dark hair, almost blending with the equally dark clouds, large, solemn eyes. Looked reflectively into mine. A thin cheek rested on a delicate little hand. A shawl, artistically draped, half hid, half showed a slight figure. A listener had there been one might have heard me, after 10 minutes' silent gazing, utter the word "mother." I might have said more, but with me, the first word uttered aloud in soliloquy rouses consciousness. It reminds me that only crazy people talk to themselves, and then I think out my monologue instead of speaking it. I had thought a long while, and a long while had contemplated the intelligence, the sweetness, and alas, the sadness also of those fine gray eyes, the mental power of that forehead, and the rare sensibility of that serious mouth, when my glance, traveling downwards, fell on a narrow billet stuck in the corner of the picture, between the frame and the canvas. Then I first asked, who sent this picture? Who thought of me, saved it out of the wreck of Crimsworth Hall, and now commits it to the care of its natural keeper? I took the note from its niche. Thus it spoke. There is a sort of stupid pleasure in giving a child sweets, a fool his bells, a dog a bone. You are repaid by seeing the child besmear his face with sugar, by witnessing how the fool's ecstasy makes a greater fool of him than ever, by watching the dog's nature come out over his bone. In giving William Crimsworth his mother's picture, I give him sweets, bells, and bone all in one. What grieves me is that I cannot behold the result. I would have added 5 shillings more to my bid if the auctioneer could only have promised me that pleasure. H.E.H.E.H. P.S. You said last night you positively declined adding another item to your account with me. Don't you think I've saved you that trouble? I muffled the picture in its green baize covering, restored it to the case, and having transported the whole concern to my bedroom, put it out of sight under. My bed. My pleasure was now poisoned by pungent pain. I determined to look no more till I could look at my ease. If Hunsden had come in at that moment, I should have said to him, I owe you nothing, Hunsden. Not a fraction of a farthing. You have paid yourself in taunts. Too anxious to remain any longer quiescent, I had no sooner breakfasted than I repaired once more to Embroust. Vandenhouten's, scarcely hoping to find him at home, for a week had barely elapsed since my first call, but fancying I might be able to glean information as to the time when his return was expected. A better result awaited me than I had anticipated, for though the family were yet at Ostend, M. Vandenhouten had come over to Brussels on business for the day. He received me with the quiet kindness of a sincere though not excitable man. I had not sat 5 minutes alone with him in his bureau, before I became aware of a sense of ease in his presence, such as I rarely experienced with strangers. I was surprised at my own composure, for, after all, I had come on business to me exceedingly painful that of soliciting a favor. I asked on what basis the calm rested. I feared it might be deceptive. Ere long I caught a glimpse of the ground, and at once I felt assured of its solidity. I knew where it was. M. Vandenhuten was rich, respected, and influential. I, poor, despised, and powerless. So we stood to the world at large as members of the world society, but to each other, as a pair of human beings, our positions were reversed. The Dutchman, he was not Flamand but pure Hollandaise, was slow, cool, of rather dense intelligence, though sound and accurate judgment. The Englishman far more nervous, active, quicker, both to plan and to practice, to conceive and to realize. The Dutchman was benevolent, the Englishman susceptible. In short, our characters dovetailed, but my mind, having more fire in action than his, instinctively assumed and kept the predominance. This point settled, and my position well ascertained, I addressed him on the subject of my affairs with that genuine frankness which full confidence can alone inspire. It was a pleasure to him to be so appealed to. He thanked me for giving him this opportunity of using a little exertion in my behalf. I went on to explain to him that my wish was not so much to be helped as to be put into the way of helping myself. Of him I did not want exertion that was to be my part, but only information and recommendation. Soon after I rose to go, he held out his hand at parting, an action of greater significance with foreigners than with Englishmen. As I exchanged a smile with him, I thought the benevolence of his truthful face was better than the intelligence of my own. Characters of my order experience a balm-like solace in the contact of such souls as animated the honest breast of Victor Vandenhuten. The next fortnight was a period of many alternations. My existence during its lapse resembled a sky of one of those autumnal nights which are specially haunted by meteors and falling stars. Hopes and fears, expectations and disappointments descended in glancing showers from zenith to horizon, but all were transient, and darkness followed swift each vanishing apparition. M. Vandenhuten aided me faithfully. He set me on the track of several places, and himself made efforts to secure them for me, but for a long time solicitation and recommendation were vain. The door either shut in my face when I was about to walk in, or another candidate, entering before me, rendered my further advance useless. Feverish and roused, no disappointment arrested me, defeat following fast. On defeat served as stimulants to will. I forgot fastidiousness, conquered reserve, thrust pride from me. I asked, I persevered, I remonstrated, I dunned. It is so that openings are forced into the guarded circle where fortune sits dealing favors round. My perseverance made me known. My importunity made me remarked. I was inquired about. My former pupils' parents, gathering the reports of their children, heard me spoken of as talented, and they echoed the word. The sound, bandied about at random, came at last to ears which, but for its universality, it might never have reached, and at the very crisis when I had tried my last effort and knew not what to do, Fortune looked in at me one morning as I sat in drear and almost desperate deliberation on my bedstead, nodded with the familiarity of an old acquaintance, though God knows I'd never met her before, and threw a prize into my lap. In the second week of October, 18, I got the appointment of English professor to all the classes of college, Brussels, with a salary of 3,000 francs per annum, and the certainty of being able, by dint of the reputation and publicity accompanying the position, to make as much more by private means. The official notice, which communicated this information, mentioned also that it was the strong recommendation of M. de Charand. Mention also that it was the strong recommendation of ambition, Vandenhouten, negotiant, which had turned a scale of choice in my favor. No sooner had I read the announcement than I hurried to mend beans. Bureau pushed the document under his nose, and when he had perused it, took both his hands and thanked him with unrestrained vivacity. My vivid words and emphatic gesture moved his Dutch calm to unwonted sensation. He said he was glad to have served me, but he had done nothing meriting such thanks. He had not laid out a centime, only scratched a few words on a sheet of paper. Again I repeated to him, "You have made me quite happy, and in a way that suits me. I do not feel an obligation irksome, conferred by your kind hand. I do not feel disposed to shun you because you have done me a favor. From this day you must consent to admit me to your intimate acquaintance, for I shall hereafter recur again and again to the pleasure of your society." "Ainsi soit-il," was the reply, accompanied by a smile of benignant content. I went away with its sunshine in my heart. Chapter 23. It was 2 o'clock when I returned to my lodgings. My dinner, just brought in from a neighboring hotel, smoked on the table. I sat down thinking to eat. Had the plate been heaped with potsherds and broken glass instead of boiled beef and haricots, I could not have made a more signal failure. Appetite had forsaken me. Impatient of seeing food which I could not taste, I put it all aside into a cupboard, and then demanded, "What shall I do till evening?" For before 6 p.m. it would be vain to seek the Rue Notre Dame aux Neiges. Its inhabitant for me, it had but one, was detained by her vocation elsewhere. I walked in the streets of Brussels, and I walked in my own room from 2 o'clock till 6. Never once in that space of time did I sit down. I was in my chamber when the last named hour struck. I had just bathed my face and feverish hands, and was standing near the glass. My cheek was crimson, my eye was flame, still all my features looked quite settled and calm. Descending swiftly the stair and stepping out, I was glad to see twilight drawing on in clouds. Such shade was to me like a grateful screen, and the chill of latter autumn, breathing in a fitful wind from the northwest, met me as a refreshing coolness. Still I saw it was cold to others, for the women I passed were wrapped in shawls, and the men had their coats buttoned close. When are we quite happy? Was I so then? No, an urgent and growing dread worried my nerves and had worried them since the first moment good tidings had reached me. How was Frances? It was 10 weeks since I had seen her, 6 since I had heard from her, or of her. I had answered her letter by a brief note, friendly but calm, in which no mention of continued correspondence or further visits was made. At that hour my bark hung on the topmost curl of a wave of fate, and I knew not on what shoal the onward rush of the billow might hurl it. I would not then attach her destiny to mine by the slightest thread. If doomed to split on the rock or run aground on the sandbank, I was resolved no other vessel should share my disaster. But 6 weeks was a long time, and could it be that she was still well and doing well? Were not all sages agreed in declaring that happiness finds no climax on earth? Dared I think that but half a street now divided me from the full cup of contentment, the draught drawn from waters said to flow only in heaven? I was at the door. I entered the quiet house. I mounted the stairs. The lobby was void and still, all the doors closed. I looked for the neat green mat. It lay duly in its place. "Signal of hope," I said, and advanced. "But I will be a little calmer. I am not going to rush in and get up a scene directly." Forcibly staying my eager step, I paused on the mat. What an absolute hush! "Is she in? Is anybody in?" I demanded to myself. A little tinkle, as of cinders falling from a grate, replied. A movement of fire was gently stirred, and the slight rustle of life continuing, a step paced equably backwards and forwards, in the apartment. Fascinated. I stood, more fixedly fascinated, when a voice rewarded the attention of my strained ear so low, so self-addressed. I never fancied the speaker otherwise than alone. Solitude might speak thus in a desert or in the hall of a forsaken house. "And ne'er but once, my son," he said, "was yon dark cavern trod in persecution's iron days, when the land was left by God. From Bewley's bog with slaughter red, a wanderer hither drew, and oft he stopped and turned his head, as by fits the night winds blew. For trampling round by Cheviot edge were heard the troopers keen, and frequent from the Whitelaw ridge the death shot flashed between," etc., etc. The old Scotch ballad was partly recited, then dropped. A pause ensued, then another strain followed, in French, of which the purport translated ran as follows. I gave, at first, attention close, then interest warm ensued, from interest, as improvement rose, succeeded gratitude. Obedience was no effort soon, and labor was no pain. If tired, a word, a glance alone would give me strength again. From others of the studious band, ere long he singled me, but only by more close demand and sterner urgency. The task he from another took, from me he did reject. He would no slight omission brook, and suffer no defect. If my companions went astray, he scarce their wanderings blamed. If I but faltered in the way, his anger fiercely flamed. Something stirred in an adjoining chamber. It would not do to be surprised eavesdropping. I tapped hastily and as hastily entered. Frances was just before me. She had been walking slowly in her room, and her step was checked by my advent. Twilight only was with her, and tranquil, ruddy firelight. To these sisters, the bright and the dark, she had been speaking, ere I entered, in poetry. Sir Walter Scott's voice, to her a foreign, far-off sound, a mountain echo, had uttered itself in the first stanzas. The second, I thought, from the style and the substance, was the language of her own heart. Her face was grave, its expression concentrated. She bent on me an unsmiling eye, an eye just returning from abstraction, just awaking from dreams. Well arranged was her simple attire, smooth her dark hair, orderly her tranquil room. But what with her thoughtful look, her serious self-reliance, her bent to meditation and haply inspiration, what had she to do with love? Nothing, was the answer of her own sad though gentle countenance. It seemed to say, I must cultivate fortitude and cling to poetry. One is to be my support, and the other my solace through life. Human affections do not bloom, nor do human passions glow for me. Other women have such thoughts. Frances, had she been as desolate as she deemed, would not have been worse off than thousands of her sex. Look at the rigid and formal race of old maids, the race whom all despise. They have fed themselves from use upwards on maxims of resignation and endurance. Many of them get ossified with the dry diet. Self-control is so continually their thought, so perpetually their object, that at last it absorbs the softer and more agreeable qualities of their nature, and they die mere models of austerity, fashioned out of a little parchment and much boned. Anatomists will tell you that there is a heart in the withered old maid's carcass, the same as in that of any cherished wife or proud mother in the land. Can this be so? I really don't know, but feel inclined to doubt it. I came forward, bade Frances good evening, and took my seat. The chair I had chosen was one she had probably just left. It stood by a little table where were her open desk and papers. I know not whether she had fully recognized me at first, but she did so now, and in a voice, soft but quiet, she returned my greeting. I had shown no eagerness. She took her cue from me and evinced no surprise. We met. as we had always met, as master and pupil, nothing more. I proceeded to handle the papers. Frances, observant and serviceable, stepped into an inner room, brought a candle, lit it, placed it by me, then drew the curtain over the lattice, and having added a little fresh fuel to the already bright fire, she drew a second chair to the table and sat down at my right hand, a little removed. The paper on the top was a translation of some grave French author into English, but underneath lay a sheet with stanzas. On this I laid hands. Frances half rose, made a movement to recover the captured spoil, saying, "That was nothing, a mere copy of verses." I put by resistance with the decision I knew she never long opposed, but on this occasion her fingers had fastened on the paper. I had quietly to unloose them. Their hold dissolved to my touch. Her hand shrunk away. My own would fain have followed it, but for the present I forbade such impulse. The first page of the sheet was occupied with the lines I had overheard. The sequel was not exactly the writer's own experience, but a composition by portions of that. Experience suggested. Thus, while egotism was avoided, the fancy was exercised and the heart satisfied. I translate as before, and my translation is nearly literal. It continued thus: when sickness stayed a while my course, he seemed impatient still, because his pupil's flagging force could not obey his will. One day when summoned to the bed, where pain and I did strive, I heard him, as he bent his head, say, "God, she must revive." I felt his hand, with gentle stress, a moment laid on mine, and wished to mark my consciousness by some responsive sign. But powerless then to speak or move, I only felt within the sense of hope, the strength of love, their healing work begin. And as he from the room withdrew, my heart his steps pursued, I long do. Prove, by efforts new, my speechless gratitude. When once again I took my place, long vacant, in the class, the unfrequent smile across his face did for one moment pass. The lessons done, the signal made of glad release and play, he, as he passed, an instant stayed, one kindly word to say: "Jane, till tomorrow you are free from tedious task and rule. This afternoon I must not see that yet pale face in school. Seek in the garden shades a seat, far from the playground den. The sun is warm, the air is sweet, stay till I call you in." A long and pleasant afternoon I passed in those green bowers, all silent, tranquil, and alone, with birds and bees and flowers. Yet, when my master's voice I heard call from the window, "Jane!" I entered joyful at the word, the busy house again. He in the hall paced up and down. He paused as I passed by. His forehead stern relaxed its frown. He raised his deep-set eye. "Not quite so pale," he murmured low. "Now, Jane, go rest a while." And as I smiled, his smoothened brow returned as glad a smile. My perfect health restored, he took his mien austere again, and, as before, he would not brook the slightest fault from Jane. The longest task, the hardest theme, fell to my share, as erst, and still I toiled to place my name in every study first. He yet begrudged and stinted praise, but I had learnt to read the secret meaning of his face, and that was my best meed. Even when his hasty temper spoke, in tones that sorrow stirred, my grief was lulled as soon as woke, by some relenting word. And when he lent some precious book, or gave some fragrant flower, I did not quail to envy's look, upheld by pleasure's power. At last our school ranks took their ground, the hard-fought field I won. The prize, a laurel wreath, was bound my throbbing forehead on. Low at my master's knee I bent, the offered crown to meet. Its green leaves through my temples sent a thrill as wild as sweet. the strong pulse of ambition struck in every vein I owned. At the same instant bleeding broke, a secret inward wound. The hour of triumph was to me, the hour of sorrow sore. A day hence I must cross the sea, near to recross it more. An hour hence, in my master's room, I with him sat alone, and told him what a dreary gloom or joy had parting thrown. He little said. The time was brief, the ship was soon to sail, and while I sobbed in bitter grief, my master but looked pale. They called in haste. He bade me go, then snatched me back again. He held me fast and murmured low, "Why will they part us, Jane? Were you not happy in my care? Did I not faithful prove? Will others to my darling bear as true, as deep a love? O God, watch o'er my foster child. O guard her gentle head. When minds are high and tempests wild, protection round her spread." They call again. Leave then my breast. Quit thy true shelter, Jane. But when deceived, repulsed, oppressed, come home to me again. I read, then dreamily made marks on the margin with my pencil, thinking that Jane was now at my side, no child but a girl of 19, and she might be mine. So my heart affirmed. Poverty's curse was taken off me. Envy and jealousy were far away, and unapprised of this. Our quiet meeting, the frost of the master's manner might melt. I felt the thaw coming fast, whether I would or not, our martyr mot. To suffer the outward revelation, a verstaafwoord of worsbrave getaal that herfstexkening. While musing thus, I thought that the grass on Hermon never drank the fresh dews of sunset more gratefully than my feelings drank the bliss of this hour. Frances rose, as if restless. She passed before me to stir the fire, which did not want stirring. She lifted and put down the little ornaments on the mantelpiece. Her dress waved within a yard of me. Slight, straight, and elegant, she stood erect on the hearth. There are impulses we can control, but there are others which control us, because they attain us with a tiger leap, and are our masters ere we have seen them. Perhaps, though, such impulses are seldom altogether bad. Perhaps reason, by a process as brief as quiet, a process that is finished ere felt, has ascertained the sanity of the deed. Instinct meditates and feels justified in remaining passive while it is performed. I know I did not reason. I did not plan or intend. Yet, whereas one moment I was sitting solus on the chair near the table, the next I held Frances on my knee, placed there with sharpness and decision, and retained with exceeding tenacity. "Monsieur, monsieur!" cried Frances, and was still. Not another word escaped her lips. Sorely confounded she seemed during the lapse of the first few moments, but the amazement soon subsided. Terror did not succeed, nor fury after all. She was only a little nearer than she had ever been before, to one she habitually respected and trusted. Embarrassment might have impelled her to contend, but self-respect checked resistance where resistance was useless. "Frances, how much regard have you for me?" was my demand. No answer. The situation was yet too new and surprising to permit speech. On this consideration, I compelled myself for some seconds to tolerate her silence, though impatient of it. Presently I repeated the same question, probably not in the calmest of tones. She looked at me. My face doubtless was no model of composure, my eyes no still wells of tranquillity. "Do speak," I urged, and a very low, hurried, yet still arch voice said, "Monsieur, vous me faites mal, de grace la chaise and puis ma main droite." In truth, I became aware that I was holding the said main droit in a somewhat Ruthless grasp, I did as desired, and for the third time, asked more gently, Frances, how much regard have you for me? Mon maître, je n'ai beaucoup, was the truthful rejoinder. Frances, have you enough to give yourself to me as my wife? To accept me as your husband? I felt the agitation of the heart. I saw the purple light of love cast its glowing reflection on cheeks, temples, neck. I desired to consult the eye, but sheltering lash and lid forbade. Monsieur, said the soft voice at last, Monsieur desires savoir si je consens, si enfin, si je peux marier avec lui. Justement. Monsieur sera tu aussi bon mari qu'il a été bon maître. I will try, Frances. A pause. Then with a new yet still subdued inflection of the voice, an inflection which provoked while it pleased me, accompanied too by a sourire à la fois fin et timide, in perfect harmony with the tone. C'est à dire, Monsieur sera toujours un peu en tête exigeant, volontaire. Have I been so, Frances? Mais oui, vous le savez, bien ben. Have I been nothing else? Mais oui, vous avez été mon meilleur ami. And what, Frances, are you to me? Votre devout élève qui voué afin de tout son cœur? Will my pupil consent to pass her life with me? Speak English now, Frances. Some moments were taken for reflection. The answer, pronounced slowly, ran thus: You have always made me happy. I like to hear you speak. I like to see you. I like to be near you. I believe you are very good and very superior. I know you are stern to those who are careless and idle, but you are kind, very kind to the attentive and industrious, even if they are not clever. Master, I should be glad to live with you always. And she made a sort of movement, as if she would have clung to me, but restraining herself, she only added with earnest emphasis, Master, I consent to pass my life with you. Very well, Frances. I drew her a little nearer to my heart. I took a first kiss from her lips, thereby sealing the compact now framed between us. Afterwards, she and I were silent, nor was our silence brief. Frances's thoughts, during this interval, I know not, nor did I attempt to guess them. I was not occupied in searching her countenance, nor in otherwise troubling her composure. The peace I felt, I wished her to feel. My arm, it is true, still detained her, but with a restraint that was gentle enough, so long as no opposition tightened it. My gaze was on the red fire, my heart was measuring its own content. It sounded, and found the depth fathomless. Monsieur, at last said my quiet companion, as stirless in her happiness as a mouse in its terror. Even now in speaking she scarcely lifted her head. Well, Frances, I like unexaggerated intercourse. It is not my way to overpower with amorous epithets, any more than to worry with selfishly importunate caresses. Monsieur est soixamazam, n'est-ce pas? Yes, especially when I am requested to be so in English. But why do you ask me? You see nothing vehement or obtrusive in my manner. Am I not tranquil enough? Ce n'est pas cela, began Frances. English, I reminded her. Well, monsieur, I wish merely to say that I should like, of course, to retain my employment of teaching. You will teach still, I suppose, monsieur? Oh, yes. It is all I have to depend on. Bon, I mean good. Thus we shall have both the same profession. I like that, and my efforts to get on will be as unrestrained as yours, will they not, monsieur? You are laying plans to be independent of me, said I. Yes, monsieur. I must be no encumbrance to you, no burden in any way. But, Frances, I have not yet told you what my prospects are. I have left Empelitz, and after nearly a month's seeking, I have got another place, with a salary of 3,000 francs a year, which I can easily double by a little additional exertion. Thus you see it would be useless for you to fag yourself by going out to give lessons. On 6,000 francs you and I can live, and live well. Frances seemed to consider. There is something flattering to man's strength, something consonant to his honorable pride, in the idea of becoming the providence of what he loves, feeding and clothing it, as God does the lilies of the field. So, to decide her resolution, I went on, life has been painful and laborious enough to you so far, Frances. You require complete rest. Your 1,200 francs would not form a very important addition to our income, and what sacrifice of comfort to earn it. Relinquish your labors, you must be weary, and let me have the happiness of giving you rest. I am not sure whether Frances had accorded due attention to my harangue. Instead of answering me with her usual respectful promptitude, she only sighed and said, "How rich you are, monsieur!" And then she stirred uneasy in my arms. 3,000 francs, she murmured, while I get only 1,200. She went on faster. However, it must be so for the present, and, monsieur, were you not saying something about my giving up my place? Oh, no, I shall hold it fast. And her little fingers emphatically tightened on mine. Think of my marrying you to be kept by you, monsieur. I could not do it, and how dull my days would be. You would be away teaching in close, noisy schoolrooms, from morning till evening, and I should be lingering at home, unemployed and solitary. I should get depressed and sullen, and you would soon tire of me. Frances, you could read and study two things you like so well. Monsieur, I could not. I like a contemplative life, but I like an active life better. I must act in some way, and act with you. I have taken notice, monsieur, that people who are only in each other's company for amusement never really like each other so well, or esteem each other so highly, as those who work together and perhaps suffer together. You speak God's truth, said I at last, and you shall have your own way, for it is the best way. Now, as a reward for such ready consent, give me a voluntary kiss. After some hesitation, natural to a novice in the art of kissing, she brought her lips into very shy and gentle contact with my forehead. I took the small gift as a loan, and repaid it promptly, and with generous interest. I know not whether Frances was really much altered since the time I first saw her, but as I looked at her now, I felt that she was singularly changed for me. The sad eye, the pale cheek, the dejected and joyless countenance I remembered as her early attributes were quite gone, and now I saw a face dressed in graces. Smile, dimple, and rosy tint rounded its contours and brightened its hues. I had been accustomed to nurse a flattering idea that my strong attachment to her proved some particular perspicacity in my nature. She was not handsome, she was not rich, she was not even accomplished, yet was she my life's treasure. I must then be a man of peculiar discernment. Tonight my eyes opened on the mistake I had made. I began to suspect that it was only my tastes which were unique, not my power of discovering and appreciating the superiority of moral worth over physical charms. For me, Frances had physical charms. In her there was no deformity to get over, none of those prominent defects of eyes, teeth, complexion, shape, which hold at bay the admiration of the boldest male champions of intellect, for women can love a downright ugly man if he be but talented. Had she been either dainty, myope, rugueuse, homme, Boss feelings towards her might still have been kindly, but they could never have been impassioned. I had affection for the poor little misshapen Sylvie, but for her high connect. It is true, Frances's mental points had been the first to interest me, and they still retained the strongest hold on my preference. but I liked the graces of her person too. I derived a pleasure, purely material, from contemplating the clearness of her brown eyes, the fairness of her fine skin, the purity of her well-set teeth, the proportion of her delicate form, and that pleasure I could ill have dispensed with. It appeared then that I too was a sensualist in my temperate and fastidious way. Now, reader, during the last 2 pages I have been giving you honey fresh from flowers, but you must not live entirely on food so luscious. Taste then a little gall, just a drop, by way of change. At a somewhat late hour, I returned to my lodgings, having temporarily forgotten that man had any such coarse cares as those of eating and drinking. I went to bed fasting. I had been excited and in action all day, and had tasted no food since 8 that morning. Besides, for a fortnight past, I had known no rest either of body or mind. The last few hours had been a sweet delirium. It would not subside now, until long after midnight broke with troubled ecstasy the rest I so much needed. At last I dozed, but not for long. It was yet quite dark when I awoke, and my waking was like that of Job, when a spirit passed before his face, and like him the hair of my flesh stood up. I might continue the parallel, for in truth, though I saw nothing, yet a thing was secretly brought unto me, and mine ear received a little thereof. There was silence, and I heard a voice, saying, in the midst of life we are in death. That sound, and the sensation of chill anguish accompanying it, many would have regarded as supernatural, but I recognized it at once as the effect of reaction. Man is ever clogged with his mortality, and it was my mortal nature which now faltered and planed, my nerves which jarred and gave a false sound, because the soul, of late rushing headlong to an aim, had overstrained the body's comparative weakness. A horror of great darkness fell upon me. I felt my chamber invaded by one I had known formerly, but had thought forever departed. I was temporarily a prey to hypochondria. She had been my acquaintance, nay, my guest, once before in boyhood. I had entertained her at bed and board for a year. For that space of time I had her to myself in secret. She lay with me, she ate with me, she walked out with me, showing me nooks in woods, hollows in hills, where we could sit together, and where she could drop her drear veil over me, and so hide sky and sun, grass and green tree, taking me entirely to her death-cold bosom, and how in his house at old Cavalier. What tales she would tell me at such hours, what songs she would recite in my ears, how she would discourse to me of her own country, the grave, and again promise to conduct me there ere long, and drawing me to the very brink of a black sullen river, show me on the other side shores unequal with mound, monument, and tablet, standing up in a glimmer more hoary than moonlight. Necropolis, she would whisper, pointing to the pale piles, and add, it contains a mansion prepared for you. But my boyhood was lonely, parentless, uncheered by brother or sister, and there was no marvel that, just as I rose to youth, a sorceress, finding me lost in vague mental wanderings, with many affections and few objects, glowing aspirations and gloomy prospects, strong desires and slender hopes, should lift up her elusive lamp to me in the distance and lure me to her vaulted home of horrors. No wonder her spells then had power. But now, when my course was widening, my prospect brightening, when my affections had found a rest, when my desires, folding wings, weary with long flight, had just alighted on the very lap of fruition and nestled there warm content under the caress of a soft hand, why did hypochondria accost me now? I repulsed her as one would, a dreaded and ghastly concubine coming to embitter a husband's heart toward his young bride. In vain, she kept her sway over me for that night and the next day and 8 succeeding days. Afterwards, my spirits began slowly to recover their tone. My appetite returned, and in a fortnight I was well. I had gone about as usual all the time and had said nothing to anybody of what I felt. But I was glad when the evil spirit departed from me, and I could again seek Frances and sit at her side, freed from the dreadful tyranny of my demon. Chapter 24. One fine, frosty Sunday in November, Frances and I took a long walk. We made the tour of the city by the boulevards, and afterwards, Frances being a little tired, we sat down on one of those wayside seats placed under the trees at intervals for the accommodation of the weary. Frances was telling me about Switzerland. The subject animated her, and I was just thinking that her eyes spoke full as eloquently as her tongue when she stopped and remarked, "Monsieur, there is a gentleman who knows you." I looked up. 3 fashionably dressed men were just then passing Englishmen. I knew by their air and gait as well as by their features. In the tallest of the trio I at once recognized Mr. Hunsden. He was in the act of lifting his hat to Frances. Afterwards he made a grimace at me and passed on. "Who is he?" "A person I knew in England." "Why did he bow to me?" "He does not know me." "Yes, he does know you in his way." "How, monsieur?" She still called me monsieur. I could not persuade her to adopt any more familiar term. "Did you not read the expression of his eyes?" "Of his eyes? No." "What did they say?" "To you they said, 'How do you do, Wilhelmina Crimsworth?' To me, 'So you have found your counterpart at last. There she sits, the female of your kind.' Monsieur, you could not read all that in his eyes. He was so soon gone." "I read that and more, Frances. I read that he will probably call on me this evening, or on some future occasion shortly, and I have no doubt he will insist on being introduced to you. Shall I bring him to your rooms?" "If you please, monsieur. I have no objection. I think, indeed, I should rather like to see him nearer. He looks so original." As I had anticipated, Mr. Hunsden came that evening. The first thing he said was, "You need not begin boasting, monsieur le professeur. I know about your appointment to college and all that. Brown has told me." Then he intimated that he had returned from Germany but a day or 2 since. Afterwards he abruptly demanded whether that was Madame Paley Ryder with whom he had seen me on the boulevards. I was going to utter a rather emphatic negative, but on second thoughts I checked myself, and seeming to assent, asked what he, thought of her. As to her, I'll come to that directly. But first, I've a word for you. I see you are a scoundrel. You've no business to be promenading about with another man's wife. I thought you had sounder sense than to get mixed up in foreign hodgepodge of this sort. But the lady? She's too good for you, evidently. She is like you, but something better than you. No beauty, though. Yet when she rose, for I looked back to see you both walk away, I thought her figure and carriage good. These foreigners understand grace. What the devil has she done with Pellet? She has not been married to him 3 months. He must be a spoon. I would not let the mistake go too far. I did not like it much. Pellet? How your head runs on Mons and Madame Pellet. You are always talking about them. I wish to the gods you had wed Maclot. Zoraide yourself. Was that young gentlewoman not Maclay? Zoraide? No. Nor Madame Zoraide either. Why did you tell a lie then? I told no lie then. I told no lie. But you is such a hurry. She's a pupil of mine, a Swiss girl. And of course you are going to be married to her. Don't deny that. Married? I think I shall if fate spares us both 10 weeks longer. That is my little wild strawberry, Hunsden, whose sweetness made me careless of your hothouse grapes. Stop! No boasting, no heroics. I won't hear them. What is she? To what caste? Does she belong? I smiled. Hunsden unconsciously laid stress on the word caste, and, in fact, Republican, Lord Hater as he was, Hunsden was as proud of his old shire blood, of his descent and family standing, respectable and respected through long generations back, as any peer in the realm of his Norman race and conquest dated title. Hunsden would as little have thought of taking a wife from a caste inferior to his own, as a Stanley would think of mating with a Cobden. I enjoyed the surprise I should give. I enjoyed the triumph of my practice over his theory, and leaning over the table and uttering the words slowly but with repressed glee, I said concisely, "She is a lace mender." Hunsden examined me. He did not say he was surprised, but surprised he was. He had his own notions of good breeding. I saw he suspected I was going to take some very rash step, but repressing declamation or remonstrance, he only answered, "Well, you are the best judge of your own affairs. A lace mender may make a good wife as well as a lady, but of course you have taken care to ascertain thoroughly that since she has not education, fortune, or station, she is well furnished with such natural qualities as you think most likely to conduce to your happiness. Has she many relations? None in Brussels. That is better. Relations are often the real evil in such cases. I cannot but think that a train of inferior connections would have been a bore to you to your life's end." After sitting in silence a little while longer, Hunsden rose and was quietly, bidding me good evening. The polite, considerate manner in which he offered me his hand, a thing he had never done before, convinced me that he thought I had made a terrible fool of myself, and that, ruined and thrown away as I was, it was no time for sarcasm or cynicism, or indeed for anything but indulgence and forbearance. "Good night, William," he said in a really soft voice, while his face looked benevolently compassionate. "Good night, lad. I wish you and your future wife much prosperity, and I hope she will satisfy your fastidious soul." I had much ado to refrain from laughing as I beheld the magnanimous pity of his mien. Maintaining, however, a grave air, I said, "I thought you would have liked to have seen McClell." "Henri? Oh, that is the name. Yes, if it would be convenient, I should like to see." "Her but?" He hesitated. "Well?" "I should on no account wish to intrude." "Come then," said I. We set out. Hunsden no doubt regarded me as a rash, imprudent man, thus to show my poor little grisette sweetheart in her poor little unfurnished grenier. But he prepared to act the real gentleman, having, in fact, the kernel of that character, under the harsh husk it pleased him to wear by way of mental mackintosh. He talked affably and even gently as we went along the street. He had never been so civil to me in his life. We reached the house, entered, ascended the stair. On gaining the lobby, Hunsden turned to mount a narrower stair which led to a higher story. I saw his mind was bent on the attics. "Here, Mr. Hunsden," said I quietly, tapping at Frances's door. He turned, in his. Genuine politeness, he was a little disconcerted at having made the mistake. His eye reverted to the green mat, but he said nothing. We walked in, and Frances rose from her seat near the table to receive us. Her mourning attire gave her a recluse, rather conventual, but withal very distinguished look. Its grave simplicity added nothing to beauty, but much to dignity. The finish of the white collar and manchettes sufficed for a relief to the merino gown of solemn black. Ornament was forsworn. Frances curtsied with sedate grace, looking, as she always did when one first accosted her, more a woman to respect than to love. I introduced Mr. Hunsden, and she expressed her happiness at making his acquaintance in French. The pure and polished accent, the low yet sweet and rather full voice, produced their effect immediately. Hunsden spoke French in reply. I had not heard him speak that language before. He managed it very well. I retired to the window seat. Mr. Hunsden, at his hostess's invitation, occupied a chair near the hearth. From my position, I could see them both, and the room too, at a glance. It's tandiver. Fathy me to this of the seachers, and Mr. Hunsd in spot of kinate trinding, and paid by midit son prem consider cruci beredit. She had many things to say to the Englishman just fresh from his island country, and she urged him with an enthusiasm of curiosity, which ere long thawed Hunsden's reserve as fire thaws a congealed viper. I use this not very flattering comparison because he vividly reminded me of a snake waking from torpor as he erected his tall form, reared his head, before a little declined, and putting back his hair from his broad Saxon forehead, showed unshaded the gleam of almost savage satire which his interlocutor's tone of eagerness and look of ardor had sufficed at once to kindle in his soul, and elicit from his eyes. He was himself, as Frances was herself, and in none but address her. "You understand English?" with a prefatory question. "A little." "Well then, you shall have plenty of it, and first I see you've not much more sense than some others of my acquaintance," indicating me with his thumb, "or else you'd never turn rabid about that dirty little country called England. For rabid, I see you are. I read Anglophobia in your looks, and hear it in your words. Why, mademoiselle, is it possible that anybody with a grain of rationality should feel enthusiasm about a mere name, and that name England? I thought you were a Lady Abbess 5 minutes ago, and respected you accordingly. And now I see you are a sort of Swiss Sibyl, with high Tory and high church principles." "England is your country?" asked Frances. "Yes, and you don't like it. I'd be sorry to like it. A little corrupt, venal lord and king cursed nation, full of mucky pride, as they say in Shire, and helpless pauperism. Rotten with abuses, worm-eaten with prejudices. You might say so of almost every state. There are abuses and prejudices everywhere, and I thought fewer in England than in other countries. Come to England and see. Come to Birmingham and Manchester. Come to St. Giles and London, and get a practical notion of how our system works. Examine the footprints of our august aristocracy. See how they walk in blood, crushing hearts as they go. Just put your head in at English cottage doors. Get a glimpse of famine crouched torpid on black hearthstones, of disease lying bare on beds without coverlets, of infamy wantoning viciously with ignorance, though indeed luxury is her favorite paramour, and princely halls are dearer to her than thatched hovels. I was not thinking of the wretchedness and vice in England. I was thinking of the good side of what is elevated in your character as a nation. There is no good side, none, at least of which you can have any knowledge, for you cannot appreciate the efforts of industry, the achievements of enterprise, or the discoveries of science. Narrowness of education and obscurity of position quite incapacitate you from understanding these points, and as to historical and poetical associations, I will not insult you, mademoiselle, by supposing that you alluded to such humbug. But I did partly. Hunsden laughed his laugh of unmitigated scorn. "I did, Mr. Hunsden. Are you of the number of those to whom such associations give no pleasure?" "Mademoiselle, what is an association? I never saw one. What is its length, breadth, weight, value, value? What price will it bring in the market? Your portrait to anyone who loved you would, for the sake of association, be without price. That inscrutable Hunsden heard this remark and felt it rather acutely too somewhere, for he colored a thing not unusual with him when hit unawares on a tender point. A sort of trouble momentarily darkened his eye, and I believe he filled up the transient pause succeeding his antagonist's home thrust by a wish that someone did love him as he would like to be loved, someone whose love he could unreservedly return. The lady pursued her temporary advantage. If your world is a world without associations, Mr. Hunsden, I no longer wonder that you hate England so. I don't clearly know what paradise is and what angels are, yet taking it to be the most glorious region I can conceive, and angels the most elevated existences, if one of them, of Abdil the Faithful. Himself, she was thinking of Milton, were suddenly stripped of the faculty of association, I think he would soon rush forth from the ever-during gates, leave heaven, and seek what he had lost in hell. Yes, in the very hell from which he turned with retorted scorn. Frances's tone in saying this was as marked as her language, and it was when the word hell twanged off from her lips with a somewhat startling emphasis that Hunsden deigned to bestow one slight glance of admiration. He liked something strong, whether in man or woman. He liked whatever dared to clear conventional limits. He had never before heard a lady say hell with that uncompromising sort of accent, and the sound pleased him from a lady's lips. He would fain have had Frances to strike the string again, but it was not in her way. The display of eccentric vigor never gave her pleasure, and it only sounded in her voice or flashed in her countenance when extraordinary circumstances, and those generally painful, forced it out of the depths where it burned latent. To me, once or twice, she had an intimate conversation, uttered venturous thoughts in nervous language, but when the hour of such manifestation was past, I could not recall it. It came of itself, and of itself departed. Hunsden's excitations she put by soon with a smile, and recurring to the theme of disputation, said, "Since England is nothing, why do the continental nations respect her so?" "I should have thought no child would have asked that question," replied Hunsden, who never at any time gave information without reproving for stupidity those who asked it of him. "If you had been my pupil, as I suppose you once had the misfortune to be that of a deplorable character not 100 miles off, I would have put you in the corner for such a confession of ignorance." "Why, mademoiselle, can't you see that it is our gold which buys us French politeness, German goodwill, and Swiss servility?" And he sneered diabolically. "Swiss," said Frances, catching the word servility. "Do you call my countrymen servile?" And she started up. I could not suppress a low laugh. There was ire in her glance and defiance in her attitude. "Do you abuse Switzerland to me, Mr. Hunsden? Do you think I have no associations? Do you calculate that I am prepared to dwell only on what vice and degradation may be found in Alpine villages, and to leave quite out of my heart the social greatness of my countrymen, and our blood-earned freedom, and the natural glories of our mountains? You're mistaken, you're mistaken. Social greatness? Call it what you will. Your countrymen are sensible fellows. They make a marketable article of what to you is an abstract idea. They have, ere this, sold their social greatness and also their blood-earned freedom to be the servants of foreign kings. You never were in Switzerland. Yes, I have been there twice. You know nothing of it. I do. And you say the Swiss are mercenary, As a parrot says poor Pole, or as the Belgians here say the English are not brave, or as the French accuse them of being perfidious, there is no justice in your dictums. There is truth. I tell you, Mr. Hunsden, you are a more unpractical man than I am an unpractical woman, for you don't acknowledge what really exists. You want to annihilate individual patriotism and national greatness as an atheist would annihilate God in his own soul by denying their existence. Where are you flying to? You were off at a tangent. I thought we were talking about the mercenary nature of the Swiss. We were, and if you prove to me that the Swiss are mercenary tomorrow, which you cannot do, I should love Switzerland still. You would be mad, then mad as a March hare to indulge in a passion for millions of shiploads of soil, timber, snow, and ice. Not so mad as you who love nothing. There's a method in my madness, there's none in yours. Your method is to squeeze the sap out of creation and make manure of the refuse by way of turning it to what you call use. You cannot reason at all, said Hunsden. There is no logic in you. Better to be without logic than without feeling, retorted Frances, who was now passing backwards and forwards from her cupboard to the table, intent, if not on hospitable thoughts, at least on hospitable deeds, for she was laying the cloth and putting plates, knives, and forks thereon. Is that a hit at me, mademoiselle? Do you suppose I am without feeling? I suppose you are always interfering with your own feelings and those of other people, and dogmatizing about the irrationality of this, that, and the other sentiment, and then ordering it to be suppressed because you imagine it to be inconsistent with logic. I do right. Frances had stepped out of sight into a sort of little pantry. She soon reappeared. You do right? Indeed, no. You are much mistaken if you think so. Just be so good as to let me get to the fire, Mr. Hunsden. I have something to cook. Anne. Interval occupied in settling a casserole on the fire. Then, while she stirred its contents, right, as if it were right to crush any pleasurable sentiment that God has given to man, especially any sentiment that, like patriotism, spreads man's selfishness in wider circles. Fire stirred, dish put down before it. Were you born in Switzerland? I should think so. Or else why should I call it my country? And where did you get your English features and figure? I am English too. Half the blood in my veins is English. Thus I have a right to a double power of patriotism, possessing an interest in two noble, free, and fortunate countries. You had an English mother? Yes, yes. And you, I suppose, had a mother from the moon or from Utopia, since not a nation in Europe has a claim on your interest. On the contrary, I'm a universal patriot. If you could understand me rightly, my country is the world. Sympathies so widely diffused must be very shallow. Will you have the goodness to come to table? Monsieur, to me, who appear to be now absorbed in reading by moonlight, Monsieur, supper is served. This was said in quite a different voice to that in which she had been bandying phrases with Mr. Hunsden, not so short, graver and softer. Frances, what do you mean by preparing supper? We had no intention of staying. Ah, monsieur, but you have stayed, and supper is prepared. You have only the alternative of eating it. The meal was a foreign one, of course. It consisted in two small but tasty dishes of meat prepared with skill and served with nicety. A salad and fromage francais completed it. The business of eating interposed a brief truce between the belligerents, but no sooner was supper disposed of than they were at it again. The fresh subject of dispute ran on the spirit of religious intolerance which Mr. Hunsden affirmed to exist strongly in Switzerland, notwithstanding the professed attachment of the Swiss to freedom. Here Frances had greatly the worst of it, not only because she was unskilled to argue, but because her own real opinions on the point in question happened to coincide pretty nearly with Mr. Hunsden's, and she only contradicted him out of opposition. At last she gave in, confessing that she thought as he thought, but bidding him take notice that she did not consider herself beaten. "No more did the French at Waterloo," said Hunsden. "There is no comparison between the cases," rejoined Frances. "Mine was a sham fight. Sham or real, it's up with you. No, though I have neither logic nor wealth of words, yet in a case where my opinion really differed from yours, I would adhere to it when I had not another word to say in its defense. You should be baffled by dumb determination. You speak of Waterloo. Your Wellington ought to have been conquered there, according to Napoleon, but he persevered in spite of the laws of war, and was victorious in defiance of military tactics. I would do as he did. I'll be bound for it you would. Probably you have some of the same sort of stubborn stuff in you." I should be sorry if I had not. He and Tell were brothers, and I'd scorned the Swiss man or woman who had none of the much enduring nature of our heroic William in his soul. If Tell was like Wellington, he was an ass. "Does not asses mean bought?" asked Frances, turning to me. "No, no," replied I. "It means an esprit fourré. And now," I continued, as I saw that fresh occasion of strife was brewing between these two, "it is high time to go." Hunsden rose. "Good-bye," said he to Frances. "I shall be off for this glorious England tomorrow, and it may be 12 months or more before I come to Brussels again. Whenever I do come, I'll seek you out, and you shall see if I don't find means to make you fiercer than a dragon. You've done pretty well this." Evening. "But next interview you shall challenge me outright. Meantime you're doomed to become Mrs. William Crimsworth, I suppose. Poor young lady! But you have a spark of spirit. Cherish it and give the professor the full benefit thereof. Are you married, Mr. Hunsden?" asked Frances suddenly. "No. I should have thought you might have guessed I was a Benedict by my look. Well, whenever you marry, don't take a wife out of Switzerland, for if you begin blaspheming Helvetia and cursing the cantons above all, if you mention the word asses in the same breath with the name Tell, for as is Baudet, I know, lo monsieur is pleased to translate it esprit, for't your mountain maid will some night smother her Bretonent, even as your own Shakespeare's Othello smothered Desdemona." "I am warned," said Hunsden. "And so are you, lad," nodding to me. "I hope yet to hear of a travesty of the Moor and his gentle lady, in which the parts shall be reversed according to the plan just sketched you. However, being in my nightcap, farewell, mademoiselle." He bowed on her hand, absolutely like Sir Charles Grandison on that of Harriet Byron, adding death from such fingers would not be without charms. "Mon Dieu!" murmured Frances, opening her large eyes and lifting her distinctly arched brows. "C'est qu'il fait des compliments bons, je ne m'y suis pas attendu." She smiled, half in ire, half in mirth, curtsied with foreign grace, and so they parted. No sooner had we got into the street than Hunsden collared me. "And that is your lace mender?" said he. "And you reckon you have done a fine magnanimous thing in offering to marry her? You, a scion of Seacombe, have." "Proved your disdain of social distinctions by taking up with an ouvrier." And I pitied the fellow, thinking his feelings had misled him, and that he had hurt himself by contracting a low match. "Just let go my collar, Hunsden." On the contrary, he swayed me to and fro, so I grappled him round the waist. It was dark, the street lonely and lampless. We had then a tug for it, and after we had both rolled on the pavement and with difficulty picked ourselves up, we agreed to walk on more soberly. "Yes, that's my lace mender," said I, "and she is to be mine for life, God willing." "God is not willing, you can't suppose it. What business have you to be suited so well with a partner? And she treats you with a sort of respect too and says, Monsieur, and modulates her tone in addressing you actually as if you were something superior. She could not evince more deference to such a one as I, were she favored by fortune to the supreme extent of being my choice instead of yours. Hunsden, you're a puppy. But you've only seen the title page of my happiness. You don't know the tale that follows. You cannot conceive the interest and sweet variety and thrilling excitement of the narrative. Hunsden, speaking low and deep, for we had now entered a busier street, desired me to hold my peace, threatening to do something dreadful if I stimulated his wrath further by boasting. I laughed till my sides ached. We soon reached his hotel. Before he entered it, he said, Don't be vainglorious. Your lace mender is too good for you, but not good enough for me. Neither physically nor morally does she come up to my ideal of a woman. No, I dream of something far beyond that pale-faced, excitable little Helvetian, by the by. She has infinitely more of the nervous, mobile Parisienne in her than of the robust Jungfrau. Your Clue. Henri is in person chétive, in mind sans caractère, compared with the queen of my visions. You, indeed, may put up with that minuous chiffon. But when I marry I must have straighter and more harmonious features, to say nothing of a nobler and better developed shape than that perverse, ill-thriven child can boast. Bribe a seraph to fetch you a coal of fire from heaven, if you will, said I, and with it kindle life in the tallest, fattest, most boneless, fullest blooded of Rubens' painted women. Leave me only my Alpine Peri, and I'll not envy you. With a simultaneous movement, each turned his back on the other. Neither said God bless you. Yet on the morrow the sea was to roll between us. Chapter 25. In 2 months more, Frances had fulfilled the time of mourning for her aunt. One January morning, the first of the New Year holidays, I went in a fiacre, accompanied only by Monsieur Vandenhout de Mace, and having alighted alone and walked upstairs, I found Frances apparently waiting for me, dressed in a style scarcely appropriate to that cold, bright, frosty day. Never till now had I seen her attired in any other than black or sad-colored stuff, and there she stood by the window, clad all in white, and white of a most diaphanous texture. Her array was very simple, to be sure, but it looked imposing and felindult. Singular to state she was, or had been crying. When I asked her if she were ready, she said, Yes, monsieur, with something very like a Czech sob, and when I took a shawl, which lay on the table, and folded it round her, not only did tear after tear course unbidden down her cheek, but she shook to my ministration like a reed. I said I was sorry to see her in such low spirits, and requested to be allowed an insight into the origin thereof. She only said it was impossible to help it, and then voluntarily, though hurriedly, putting her hand into mine, accompanied me out of the room, and ran downstairs with a quick, uncertain step, like one who was eager to get some formidable piece of business over. I put her into the fiacre. Get! Vandenhouten received her and seated her beside himself. We drove all together to the Protestant chapel, went through a certain service in the common prayer book, and she and I came out married. Miss Vandenhouten had given the bride away. We took no bridal trip. Our modesty, screened by the peaceful obscurity of our station and the pleasant isolation of our circumstances, did not exact that additional precaution. We repaired at once to a small house I had taken in the Faubourg, nearest to that part of the city where the scene of our avocations lay. 3 or 4 hours after the wedding ceremony, Frances, divested of her bridal snow and attired in a pretty lilac gown of warmer materials, a piquant black silk apron, and a lace collar with some finishing decoration of lilac ribbon, was kneeling on the carpet of a neatly furnished though not spacious parlor, arranging on the shelves of a chiffonier some books, which I handed to her from the table. It was snowing fast out of doors. The afternoon had turned out wild and cold. The leaden sky seemed full of drifts, and the street was already ankle-deep in the white downfall. Our fire burned bright. Our new habitation looked brilliantly clean and fresh. The furniture was all arranged, and there were but some articles of glass, china, books, and nickel to put in order. Frances found in this business occupation till tea time, and then, after I had distinctly instructed her how to make a cup of tea in rational English style, and after she had got over the dismay occasioned by seeing such an extravagant amount of material put into the pot, she administered to me a proper British repast, at which there wanted neither candles nor urn, firelight nor comfort. Our week's holiday glided by, and we redressed ourselves to labor. Both my wife and I began in good earnest with the notion that we were working people, destined to earn our bread by exertion, and that of the most assiduous kind. Our days were thoroughly occupied. We used to part every morning at 8 o'clock, and not meet again till 5 p.m. But into what sweet rest did the turmoil of each busy day decline! Looking down the vista of memory, I see the evenings passed in that little parlor like a long string of rubies circling the dusky brow of the past. Unvaried were they as each cut gem, and like each gem brilliant and burning. A year and a half passed. One morning it was a fete, and we had the day to ourselves. Frances said to me, with a suddenness peculiar to her when she had been thinking long on a subject, and at last, having come to a conclusion, wished to test its soundness by the touchstone of my judgment. "I don't work enough." "What now?" demanded I, looking up from my coffee, which I had been deliberately stirring while enjoying, in anticipation, a walk I proposed to take with Frances. That fine summer day, it was June, to a certain farmhouse in the country, where we were to dine. What now? And I saw at once, in the serious ardor of her face, a project of vital importance. "I am not satisfied," returned she. "You are now earning 8,000 francs a year." It was true. My efforts, punctuality, the fame of my pupil's progress, the publicity of my station, had so far helped me on, while I am still at my miserable 1,200 francs. I can do better, and I will. You work as long and as diligently as I do, Frances. Yes, monsieur, but I am not working in the right way, and I am convinced of it. You wish to change, you have a plan for progress in your mind. Go and put on your bonnet, and while we take our walk, you shall tell me of it. Yes, monsieur. She went as docile as a well-trained child. She was a curious mixture of tractability and firmness. I sat thinking about her and wondering what her plan could be when she re-entered. "Monsieur, I have given Minnie our bonnet leave to go out too, as it is so very fine. So will you be kind enough to lock the door and take the key with you?" "Kiss me, Mrs. Crimsworth," was my not very apposite reply, but she looked so engaging in her light summer dress and little cottage bonnet, and her manner in speaking to me was then, as always, so unaffectedly and suavely respectful, that my heart expanded at the sight of her, and a kiss seemed necessary to content its importunity. "There, monsieur. Why do you always call me monsieur? Say William. I cannot pronounce your W. Besides, monsieur belongs to you. I like it best." Minnie having departed in clean cap and smart shawl, we two set out, leaving the house solitary and silent, at least, but for the ticking of the clock. We were soon clear of Brussels. The fields received us, and then the lanes, remote from carriage, resounding chiocées. Ere long we came upon a nook, so rural, green and secluded. It might have been a spot in some pastoral English province. A bank of short and mossy grass under a hawthorn offered a seat too tempting to be declined. We took it, and when we had admired and examined some English looking wild flowers growing at our feet, I recalled Frances's attention and my own to the topic touched on at breakfast. What was her plan? A natural one, the next step to be mounted by us, or at least by her, if she wanted to rise in her profession. She proposed to begin a school. We already had the means for commencing on a careful scale, having lived greatly within our income. We possessed, too, by this time, an extensive and eligible connection, in the sense advantageous to our business, for, though our circle of visiting acquaintance continued as limited as ever, we were now widely known in schools and families as teachers. When Frances had developed her plan, she intimated in some closing sentences her hopes for the future. If we only had good health and tolerable success, me might, she was sure, in time realize an independency, and that, perhaps before we were too old to enjoy it, then both she and I would rest, and what was to hinder us from going to live in England? England was still her promised land. I'd put no obstacle in her way, raised no objection. I knew she was not one who could live quiescent and inactive, or even comparatively inactive. Duties she must have to fulfill, and important duties. Work to do, and exciting, absorbing, profitable work. Strong faculties stirred in her frame, and they demanded full nourishment, free exercise. Mine was not the hand ever to starve or cramp them. No, I delighted in offering them sustenance, and in clearing them wider space for action. You have conceived a plan, Frances, said I, and a good plan. Execute it. You have my free consent, and wherever and whenever my assistance is wanted, ask and you shall have. Frances's eyes thanked me almost with tears. Just a sparkle or two soon brushed away. She possessed herself of my hand too, and held it for some time very close, clasped in both her own. But she said no more than, "Thank you, monsieur." We passed a divine day and came home late, lighted by a full summer moon. 10 years rushed now upon me with dusty, vibrating, unresting wings. Years of bustle, action, unslacked endeavor, years in which I and my wife, having launched ourselves in the full career of progress, as progress whirls on in European capitals, scarcely knew repose, were strangers to amusement, never thought of indulgence. And yet as our course ran side by side, as we marched hand in hand, we neither repented, nor faltered. Hope indeed cheered us. Health kept us up. Harmony of thought and deed smoothed many difficulties. And finally success bestowed every now and then encouraging reward on diligence. Our school became one of the most popular in Brussels, and as by degrees we raised our terms and elevated our system of education, our choice of pupils grew more select, and at length included the children of the best families in Belgium. We had too an excellent connection in England, first opened by the unsolicited recommendation of Mr. Hunsden, who having been over and having abused me for my prosperity in set terms, went back, and soon after sent a leash of young shire heiresses, his cousins, as he said, to be polished off by Mrs. Crimsworth. As to the same Mrs. Crimsworth, in one sense she was become another woman, though in another she remained unchanged. So different was she, under different circumstances. I seemed to possess 2 wives. The faculties of her nature, already disclosed when I married her, remained fresh and fair, but other faculties shot up strong, branched out broad, and quite altered the external character of the plant. Firmness, activity, and enterprise, covered with gray foliage, poetic feeling and fervor. But these flowers were still there, preserved pure and dewy under the umbrage of later growth and hardier nature. Perhaps I only in the world knew the secret of their existence, but to the medo thurwader reprebrii. S. In the daytime, my house and establishment were conducted by Madame the Directress, a stately and elegant woman, bearing much anxious thought on her large brow, much calculated dignity in her serious mien. Immediately after breakfast, I used to part with this lady. I went to my college, she to her schoolroom. Returning for an hour in the course of the day, I found her always in class, intently occupied. Silence, industry, observance, attending on her presence. When not actually esquadand, she was hide. When communicating instruction, her aspect was more animated. She seemed to feel a certain enjoyment in the occupation. The language in which she addressed her pupils, though simple and unpretending, was never trite or dry. She did not speak from routine formulas. She made her own phrases as she went on, and very nervous and impressive phrases they frequently were. Often, when elucidating favorite points of history or geography, she would wax genuinely eloquent in her earnestness. Her pupils, or at least the elder and more intelligent amongst them, recognized well the language of a superior mind. They felt, too, and some of them received the impression of elevated sentiments. There was little fondling between mistress and girls, but some of Frances's pupils in time learnt to love her sincerely. All of them beheld her with respect. Her general demeanor towards them was serious, sometimes benignant when they pleased her with their progress and attention, always scrupulously refined and considerate. In cases where reproof or punishment was called for, she was usually forbearing enough. But if any took advantage of that forbearance, which sometimes happened, a sharp, sudden, and lightning-like severity taught the culprit the extent of the mistake committed. Sometimes a gleam of tenderness softened her eyes and manner, but this was rare, only when a pupil was sick, or when it pined after home, or in the case of some little motherless child, or of one much poorer than its companions whose koosd gaumet, or of what did hede bemanske cave to the orf. Young countesses and so-clad misses. Over such feeble fledglings the directress spread a wing of kindliest protection. It was to their bedside she came at night to tuck them warmly in. It was after them she looked in winter to see that they always had a comfortable seat by the stove. It was they who by turns were summoned to the salon to receive some little dole of cake or fruit, to sit on a footstool at the fireside to enjoy home comforts, and almost home liberty, for an evening together to be spoken to gently and softly, comforted. And the credit as to Julia and Georgiana G., daughters of an English baronet, as to McClure Matilda, heiress of a Belgian count, and sundry other children of patrician race, the directress was careful of them as of the others, anxious for their progress, as for that of the rest, but it never seemed to enter her head to distinguish them by a mark of preference. One girl of noble blood she loved dearly, a young Irish baroness, Lady Catherine, but it was for her enthusiastic heart and clever head, for her generosity and her genius, the title and rank went for nothing. My afternoons were spent also in college, with the exception of an hour that my wife Delia exacted of me for her establishment, and with which she would not dispense. She said that I must spend that time amongst her pupils, to learn their characters, to be acquainted with everything that was passing in the house, to become interested in what interested her, to be able to give her my opinion on knotty points when she required it, and this she did constantly, never allowing my interest in the pupils to fall asleep, and never making any change of importance without my cognizance and consent. She delighted to sit by me when I gave my lessons in literature, her hands folded on her knee, the most fixedly attentive of any present. She rarely addressed me in class. When she did it was with an air of marked deference. It was her pleasure, her joy, to make me still the master in all things. At 6 o'clock p.m., my daily labor ceased. I then came home, for my home was my heaven. Ever at that hour, as I entered our private sitting room, the lady directress vanished from before my eyes, and Frances Henri, my own little lace mender, was magically restored to my arms. Much disappointed she would have been if her master had not been as constant to the tryst as herself, and if his truthful kiss had not been prompt to answer her soft bonsoir for monsieur. Talk French to me she would, and many a punishment she has had for her willfulness. I fear the choice of chastisement must have been injudicious, for instead of correcting the fault, it seemed to encourage its renewal. Our evenings were our own. That recreation was necessary to refresh our strength for the due discharge of our duties. Sometimes we spent them all in conversation, and my young Genovese, now that she was thoroughly accustomed to her English professor, now that she loved him too, absolutely to fear him much, reposed in him a confidence so unlimited that topics of conversation could no more be wanting with him than subjects for communion with her own heart. In those moments, happy as a bird with his mate, she would show me what she had of vivacity, of mirth, of originality in her well-dowered nature. She would show, too, some stores of raillery, of malice, and would vex, tease, pique me sometimes about what she called my bizarreries Anglaises, my caprices insulaires, with a wild and witty wickedness that made a perfect white demon of her while it lasted. This was rare, however, and the elfish freak was always short, sometimes when driven a little hard in the war of words, for her tongue did ample justice to the pith, the point, the delicacy of her native French, in which language she always attacked me. I used to turn upon her with my old decision, and arrest bodily the sprite that teased me. Vain idea! No sooner had I grasped hand or arm than the elf was gone, the provocative smile quenched in the expressive brown eyes, and a ray of gentle homage shone under the lids in its place. I had seized a mere vexing fairy, and found a submissive and supplicating little mortal woman in my arms. Then I made her get a book and read English to me for an hour by way of penance. I frequently dosed her with Wordsworth in this way, and Wordsworth steadied her soon. She had a difficulty in comprehending his deep, serene, and sober mind. His language, too, was not facile to her. She had to ask questions, to sue for explanations, to be like a child and a novice, and to acknowledge me as her senior and director. Her instinct instantly penetrated and possessed the meaning of more ardent and imaginative writers. Byron excited her. Scott she loved. Wordsworth only she puzzled at, wondered over, and hesitated to pronounce an opinion upon. But whether she read to me or talked with me, whether she teased me in French or entreated me in English, whether she jested with wit or inquired with deference, narrated with interest or listened with attention, whether she smiled at me or on me, always at 9 o'clock I was left abandoned. She would extricate herself from my arms, quit my side, take her lamp, and be gone. Her mission was upstairs. I followed her sometimes and watched her. First, she opened the door of the dortoir, the pupils' chamber. Noiselessly she glided up the long room between the 2 rows of white beds, surveyed all the sleepers, if any were wakeful, especially if any were sad, spoke to them and soothed them, stood some minutes to ascertain that all was safe and tranquil, trimmed the watch-light which burned in the apartment all night, then withdrew, closing the door behind her, without sound. Thence she glided to our own chamber. It had a little cabinet within. This she sought. There, too, appeared a bed, but one, and that a very small one. Her face the night I followed and observed her changed as she approached this tiny couch. From grave it warmed to earnest. She shaded with one hand the lamp she held in the other. She bent above the pillow and hung over a child asleep. It slumbered that evening at least, and usually, I believe, was sound and calm. No tear wet its dark eyelashes. No peeps. Frances gazed. She did not smile, and yet the deepest delight flushed her face. Feeling pleasurable, powerful, worked in her whole frame, which still was motionless. I saw, indeed, her heart heave. Her lips were a little apart. Her breathing grew somewhat hurried. The child smiled. Then at last the mother smiled too, and said in low soliloquy, "God bless my little son." She stooped closer over him, breathed the softest of kisses on his brow, covered his minute hand with hers, and at last started up and came away. I regained the parlor before her. Entering it 2 minutes later, she said quietly as she put down her extinguished lamp, "Victor rests well. He smiled in his sleep. He has your smile, monsieur." The said Victor was of course her own boy, born in the 3rd year of our marriage. His Christian name had been given him in honor of Mr. Mar Vandenhuten, who continued always our trusty and well-beloved friend. Frances was then a good and dear wife to me, because I was to her a good, just, and faithful husband. What she would have been had she married a harsh, envious, careless man, a profligate, a prodigal, a drunkard, or a tyrant is another question, and one which I once propounded to her. Her answer, given after some reflection, was, I should have tried to endure the evil or cure it for a while, and when I found it intolerable and incurable, I should have left my torturer suddenly and silently. And if law or might had forced you back again, what to a drunkard, a profligate, a selfish spendthrift, an unjust fool? Yes, I would have gone back, again assured myself whether or not his vice and my misery were capable of remedy, and if not, have left him again. And if again forced to return and compelled to abide? I don't know, she said hastily. Why do you ask me, monsieur? I would have an answer, because I saw a strange kind of spirit in her eye, whose voice I determined to waken. Monsieur, if a wife's nature loathes that of the man she is wedded to, marriage must be slavery. Against slavery all right-thinkers revolt, and though torture be the price of resistance, torture must be dared. Though the only road to freedom lie through the gates of death, those gates must be passed. For freedom is indispensable. Then, monsieur, I would resist as far as my strength permitted. When that strength failed, I should be sure of a refuge. Death would certainly screen me both from bad laws and their consequences. Voluntary death, Frances? No, monsieur. I'd have courage to live out every throe of anguish fate assigned me, and principle to contend for justice and liberty to the last. I see you would have made no patient Grizzle. And now, supposing fate had merely assigned you the lot of an old maid, what then? How would you have liked celibacy? Not much, certainly. An old maid's life must doubtless be void and vapid, her heart strained and empty. Had I been an old maid, I should have spent existence in efforts to fill the void and ease the aching. I should have probably failed and died weary and disappointed, despised and of no account, like other single women. But I'm not an old maid, she added quickly. I should have been, though, but for my master. I should never have suited any man but Professor Crimsworth. No other gentleman, French, English, or Belgian, would have thought me amiable or handsome, and I doubt whether I should have cared for the approbation of many others, if I could have obtained it. Now, I have been Professor Crimsworth's wife 8 years, and what is he in my eyes? Is he honorable, beloved? She stopped. Her voice was cut off. Her eyes suddenly suffused. She and I were standing side by side. She threw her arms round me and strained me to her heart with passionate earnestness. The energy of her whole being glowed in her dark and then dilated eye and crimsoned her animated cheek. Her look and movement were like inspiration. In one there was such a flash, in the other such a power. Half an hour afterwards, when she had become calm, I asked where all that wild vigor was gone, which had transformed her erewhile and made her glance so thrilling and ardent, her actions so rapid and strong. She looked down, smiling softly and passively. "I cannot tell where it is gone, monsieur," said she, "but I know that, whenever it is wanted, it will come back again." Behold us now at the close of the 10 years, and we have realized an independency. The rapidity with which we attained this end had its origin in 3 reasons. Firstly, we worked so hard for it. Secondly, we had no encumbrances to delay success. Thirdly, as soon as we had capital to invest, 2 well-skilled counselors, one in Belgium, one in England, viz., Van den Houten and Hunsden, gave us each a word of advice as to the sort of investment to be chosen. The suggestion made was judicious, and being promptly acted on, the result put gained 5K all this to accounts being wound up, and our professional connection disposed of, we both agreed that, as Mammon was not our master, nor his service that in which we desired to spend our lives, as our desires were temperate, and our habits unostentatious, we had now abundance to live on abundance, to leave our boy, and should besides always have a balance on hand, which properly managed by right sympathy and unselfish activity, might help philanthropy in her enterprises and put solace into the hand of charity. To England we now resolved to take wing. We arrived there safely. Frances realized the dream of her lifetime. We spent a whole summer and autumn in traveling from end to end of the British Islands, and afterwards passed a winter in London. Then we thought it high time to fix our residence. My heart yearned towards my native county of Shire, and it is in Shire I now live. It is in the library of my own home I am now writing. That home lies amid a sequestered and rather hilly region, 30 miles removed from XE, a region whose verdure the smoke of mills has not yet sullied, whose waters still run pure, whose swells of moorland preserve in some ferny glens that lie between them the very primal wildness of nature, her moss, her bracken, her bluebells, her scents of reed and heather, her free and fresh breezes. My house is a picturesque and not too spacious dwelling, with low and long windows, a trellised and leaf-veiled porch. Over the front door just now, on this summer evening, looking like an arch of roses and ivy. The garden is chiefly laid out in lawn, formed of the sod of the hills, with herbage short and soft as moss, full of its own peculiar flowers, tiny and star-like, embedded in the minute embroidery of their fine foliage. At the bottom of the sloping garden there is a wicket, which opens upon a lane as green as the lawn, very long, shady, and little frequented. On the turf of this lane generally appear the first daisies of spring, whence its name Daisy Lane, serving also as a distinction to the house. It terminates the lane, I mean in a valley full of wood, which wood, chiefly oak and beech, spread shadowy about the vicinage of a very old mansion, one of the Elizabethan structures, much larger, as well as more antique than Daisy Lane, the property and residence of an individual familiar both to me and to the reader. Yes, in Hunsden Wood, for so are those glades, and that grey building, with many gables and more chimneys, named Abbots York Hunsden, still unmarried, Never, I suppose, having yet found his ideal, though I know at least a score of young ladies within a circuit of 40 miles who would be willing to assist him in the search. The estate fell to him by the death of his father 5 years since. He has given up trade after having made by it sufficient to pay off some encumbrances by which the family heritage was burdened. I say he abides here, but I do not think he is resident above 5 months out of the 12. He wanders from land to land and spends some part of each winter in town. He frequently brings visitors with him when he comes to Shire, and these visitors are often foreigners. Sometimes he has a German metaphysician, sometimes a French savant. He had once a dissatisfied and savage-looking Italian who neither sang nor played, and of whom Frances affirmed that he had doubt l'air d'un conspirator. What English guests Hunsdon invites are all either men of Birmingham or Manchester hardmen, seemingly knit up in one thoughts, whose talk is of free trade. The foreign visitors, too, are politicians. They take a wider theme, European progress, the spread of liberal sentiments over the continent. On their mental tablets, the names of Russia, Austria, and the Pope are inscribed in red ink. I have heard some of them talk vigorous sense. Yeah, I have been present at polyglot discussions in the old oak-lined dining room at Hunsdon Wood, where a singular insight was given of the sentiments entertained by resolute minds respecting old northern despotisms and old southern superstitions. Also, I have heard much twaddle, announced chiefly in French and Deutsch, but let that pass. Hunsdon himself tolerated the drivelling theories. With the practical men he seemed leagued hand in heart. When Hunsdon is staying alone at the Wood, which seldom happens, he generally finds his way 2 or 3 times a week to Daisy Lane. He has a philanthropic motive for coming to smoke his cigar in our porch on summer evenings. He says he does it to kill the earwigs amongst the roses, with which insects, but for his benevolent fumigations, he intimates we should certainly be overrun. On wet days, too, we are almost sure to see him. According to him, it gets on time to work me into lunacy by treading on my mental corns, or to force from Mrs. Crimsworth revelations of the dragon within her, by insulting the memory of Hofer and Tell. We also go frequently to Hunsdon Wood, and both I and Frances relish a visit there highly. If there are other guests, their characters are an interesting study. Their conversation is exciting and strange. The absence of all local narrowness, both in the host and his chosen society, gives a metropolitan, almost a cosmopolitan freedom and largeness to the talk. Hunsdon himself is a polite man in his own house. He has, when he chooses to employ it, an inexhaustible power of entertaining guests. His very mansion, too, is interesting. The rooms look storied, the passages legendary, the low-ceiled chambers, with their long rows of diamond paned lattices, have an old-world, haunted air. In his travels he has collected stores of articles of virtue, which are well and tastefully disposed in his panelled or tapestried rooms. I have seen there 1 or 2 pictures, and 1 or 2 pictures of statuary, which many an aristocratic connoisseur might have envied. When I and Frances have dined and spent an evening with Hunsdon, he often walks home with us. His wood is large, and some of the timber is old and of huge growth. There are winding ways in it which, pursued through glade and brake, make the walk back to Daisy Lane a somewhat long one. Many a time, when we have had the benefit of a full moon, and when the night has been mild and balmy, when, moreover, a certain nightingale has been singing, and a certain stream, hid in alders, has lent the song a soft accompaniment, the remote church bell of the one hamlet in a district of 10 miles has tolled midnight ere the lord of the wood left us at our porch. Free-flowing was his talk at such hours, and far more quiet and gentle than in the daytime and before numbers. He would then forget politics and discussion, and would dwell on the pastimes of his house, on his family history, on his self and his own feelings, subjects each and all invested with a peculiar zest, for they were each and all unique. One glorious night in June, after I had been taunting him about his ideal bride and asking him when she would come and graft her foreign beauty on the old Hunsdon oak, he answered suddenly, "You call her ideal, but see, here is her shadow, and there cannot be a shadow without a substance." He had led us from the depth of the winding way into a glade from whence the beeches withdrew, leaving it open to the sky. An unclouded moon poured her light into this glade, and Hunsdon held out under her beam an ivory miniature. Frances, with eagerness, examined it first. Then she gave it to me still, however, pushing her little face close to mine and seeking in my eyes what I thought of the portrait. I thought it represented a very handsome and very individual-looking female face with, as he had once said, straight and harmonious features. It was dark. The hair, raven black, swept not only from the brow, but from the temples seemed thrust away carelessly, as if such beauty dispensed with, nay, despised arrangement. The Italian eye looked straight into you, and an independent, determined eye it was. The mouth was as firm as fine. The chin, ditto. On the back of the miniature was gilded Lucia. "That is a real head," was my conclusion. Hunsdon smiled. "I think so," he replied. "All was real in Lucia, and she was somebody you would have liked to marry but could not?" "I should certainly have liked to marry her, and that I have not done so is a proof that I could not." He repossessed himself of the miniature, now again in Frances's hand, and put it away. "What do you think of it?" he asked of my wife as he buttoned his coat over it. "I am sure Lucia once wore chains and broke them," was the strange answer. "I do not mean matrimonial chains," she added, correcting herself, as if she feared misinterpretation, "but social chains of some sort. The face is that of one who has made an effort, and a successful and triumphant effort, to wrest some vigorous and valued faculty from insupportable constraint, and when Lucia's faculty got free, I am certain it spread wide pinions and carried her higher than—" She hesitated. "Then what?" demanded Hunsdon. "Then less conveniences permitted you to follow. I think you grow spiteful, impertinent. Lucia has trodden the stage," continued Frances. "You never seriously thought of marrying her. You admired her originality, her fearlessness, her energy of body and mind. You delighted in her talent, whatever that was, whether song, dance, or dramatic representation. You worshipped her beauty, which was of the sort after your own heart, but I am sure she filled a sphere from whence you would never have thought of taking a wife." "Ingenious," remarked Hunsdon. "Whether true or not is another question. Meantime, don't you feel your little lamb of a spirit wax very pale, beside such a girandole as Lucia's?" "Yes, candid at least, and the professor will soon be dissatisfied with the dim light you give. Will you, monsieur?" My sight was always too weak to endure a blaze, Frances, and we had now reached the wicket. I said, a few pages back, that this is a sweet summer evening. It is there has been a series of lovely days, and this is the loveliest. The hay is just carried from my fields. Its perfume still lingers in the air. Frances proposed to me, an hour or two since, to take tea out on the lawn. I see the round table, loaded with china, placed under a certain beech. Hunsdon is expected, nay, I hear he is come. There is his voice, laying down the law on some point with authority. That of Frances replies. She opposes him, of course. They are disputing about Victor, of whom Hunsdon affirms that his mother is making a milksop. Mrs. Crimworth retaliates. Better 1,000 times he should be a milksop than what he, Hunsdon, calls a fine lad. And moreover, she says that if Hunsdon were to become a fixture in the neighborhood, and were not a mere comet, coming and going, No one knows how, when, where, or why she should be quite uneasy till she had got Victor away to a school at least 100 miles off, for that with his mutinous maxims and unpractical dogmas he would ruin a score of children. I have a word to say of Victor ere I shut this manuscript in my desk, but it must be a brief one, for I hear the tinkle of silver on porcelain. Victor is as little of a pretty child as I am of a handsome man, or his mother of a fine woman. He is pale and spare, with large eyes, as dark as those of Frances, and as deeply set as mine. His shape is symmetrical enough but slight. His health is good. I never saw a child smile less than he does, nor one who knits such a formidable brow when sitting over a book that interests him, or while listening to tales of adventure, peril, or wonder narrated by his mother Hunsden or myself. But though still, he is not unhappy, though serious, not morose. He has a susceptibility to pleasurable sensations almost too keen, for it amounts to enthusiasm. He learned to read in the old-fashioned way out of a spelling book at his mother's knee. And as he got on without driving by that method, she thought it unnecessary to buy him ivory letters, or to try any of the other inducements to learning now deemed indispensable. When he could read, he became a glutton of books, and is so still. His toys have been few, and he has never wanted more. For those he possesses, he seems to have contracted a partiality amounting to affection. This feeling, directed towards one or two living animals of the house, strengthens almost to a passion. Mr. Hunsden gave him a mastiff cub which he called York after the donor. It grew to a superb dog, whose fierceness, however, was much modified by the companionship and caresses of its young master. He would go nowhere, do nothing without York. York lay at his feet while he learned his lessons, played with him in the garden, walked with him in the lane and wood, sat near his chair at meals, was fed always by his own hand, was the first thing he sought in the morning, the last he left at night. York accompanied Mr. Hunsden one day to X, and was bitten in the street by a dog in a rabid state. As soon as Hunsden had brought him home, and had informed me of the circumstance, I went into the yard and shot him where he lay licking his wound. He was dead in an instant. He had not seen me level the gun. I stood behind him. I had scarcely been 10 minutes in the house, when my ear was struck with sounds of anguish. I repaired to the yard once more, for they proceeded thence. Victor was kneeling beside his dead mastiff, bent over it, embracing its bull-like neck, and lost in a passion of the wildest woe. He saw me. "Oh, Papa, I'll never forgive you, I'll never forgive you," was his exclamation. "You shot York, I saw it from the window. I never believed you could be so cruel. I can love you no more." I had much ado to explain to him, with a steady voice, the stern necessity of the deed. He still, with that inconsolable and bitter accent which I cannot render, but which pierced my heart, repeated, "He might have been cured. You should have tried. You should have burnt the wound with a hot iron, or covered it with caustic. You gave no time, and now it is too late. He is dead." He sank fairly down on the senseless carcase. I waited patiently a long while, till his grief had somewhat exhausted him, and then I lifted him in my arms and carried him to his mother, sure that she would comfort him best. She had witnessed the whole scene from a window. She would not come out for fear of increasing my difficulties by her emotion, but she was ready now to receive him. She took him to her kind heart and on to her gentle lap, consoled him, but with her lips, her eyes, her soft embrace for some time, and then, when his sobs diminished, told him that York had felt no pain in dying, and that if he had been left to expire naturally, His end would have been most horrible. Above all, she told him that I was not cruel, for that idea seemed to give isquid pain to pui de peran that act what it had but Victor would have been no true son of his father had these considerations, these reasons, breathed in so low, so sweet a tone. Married to caresses so benign, so tender, to look so inspired with pitying sympathy, produced no effect on him. They did produce an effect. He grew calmer, rested his face on her shoulder, and lay still in her arms. Looking up, shortly, he asked his mother to tell him over again what she had said about York having suffered no pain and my not being. Cruel. The balmy words being repeated, he again pillowed his cheek on her breast, and was again tranquil. Some hours after, he came to me in my library, asked if I forgave him, and desired to be reconciled. I drew the lad to my side, and there I kept him a good while, and had much talk with him, in the course of which he disclosed many points of feeling and thought I approved of in my son. I found, it is true, few elements of the good fellow, or the fine fellow, in him, scant sparkles of the spirit which loves to flash over the wine-cup, or which kindles the passions to a destroying fire, but I saw in the soil of his heart healthy and swelling germs of compassion, fidelity. I discovered in the garden of his intellect a rich growth of wholesome principles, reason, justice, moral courage, promised, if not blighted, a fertile bearing. So I bestowed on his large forehead, and on his cheek still pale with tears, a proud and contented kiss, and sent him away comforted. Yet I saw him the next day laid on the mound under which York had been buried, his face covered with his hands. He was melancholy for some weeks, and more than a year elapsed before he would listen to any proposal of having another dog. Victor learns fast. He must soon go to Eton, where I suspect his first year or two will be utter wretchedness. To leave me is in heaven, the fagging will not suit him, but emulation, thirst after knowledge, the glory of success, will stir and reward him in time. Meantime, I feel in myself a strong repugnance to fix the hour which will uproot my soul olive branch and transplant it far from me, and when I speak to Frances Auditude, to Fairport to Quell, Olive the step must, however, be taken, and it shall be. For though Frances will not make a milksop of her son, she will accustom him to a style of treatment, a forbearance, a congenial tenderness. He will meet with from none else. She sees, as I also see, a something in Victor's temper, a kind of electrical ardor and power which emits, now and then, ominous sparks. Hunsden calls it his spirit, and says it should not be curbed. I call it the leaven of the offending Adam, and consider that it should be, if not whipspepped out of him, at least soundly disciplined, and that he will be cheap of any amount of either bodily or mental suffering which will ground him radically in the art of self-control. Frances gives this something in her son's marked character no name, but when it appears in the grinding of his teeth, in the glittering of his eye, in the fierce revolt of feeling against disappointment, mischance, sudden sorrow, or supposed injustice, she folds him to her breast, or takes him to walk with her alone in the wood. Then she reasons with him like any philosopher, and to reason Victor is ever accessible. Then she looks at him with eyes of love, and by love Victor can be infallibly glisse, but we helped up to this balgas. Oh, no. For that flash in his black eye, for that cloud on his bony brow, for that compression of his statuesque lips, the lad will some day get blows instead of blandishments, kicks instead of kisses. Then for the fit of mute fury which will sicken his body and madden his soul. Then for the ordeal of merited and salutary suffering, out of which he will come, I trust, a wiser and a better man. I see him now. He stands by Hunsden, who is seated on the lawn under the beech. Hunsden's hand rests on the boy's collar, and he is instilling God knows what principles into his ear. Victor looks well just now, for he listens with a sort of smiling interest. He never looks so like his mother as when he smiles pity. The sunshine breaks out so rarely. Victor has a preference for Hunsden, full as strong as I deem desirable, being considerably more potent, decided, and indiscriminating than any I ever entertained for that personage myself. Frances, too, regards it with a sort of unexpressed anxiety. While her son leans on Hunsden's knee or rests against his shoulder, she roves with restless movement round, like a dove guarding its young from a hovering hawk. She says she wishes Hunsden had children of his own, for then he would better know the danger of inciting their pride and indulging their foibles. Frances approaches my library window, puts aside the honeysuckle which half covers it, and tells me tea is ready. Seeing that I continue busy, she enters the room, comes near me quietly, and puts her hand on my shoulder. Monsieur est trop publique. I shall soon have done. She draws a chair near and sits down to wait till I have finished. Her presence is as pleasant to my mind as the perfume of the fresh hay and spicy flowers, as the glow of the westering sun, as the repose of the midsummer eve are to my senses. But Hunsden comes. I hear his step, and there he is, bending through the lattice, from which he has thrust away the woodbine with unsparing hand, disturbing 2 bees and a butterfly. Crimsworth, I say, Crimsworth. Take that pin out of his hand, mistress, and make him lift up his head. Well, Hunsden, I hear you. I was at X yesterday. Your brother Ned is getting richer than Croesus by railway speculations. They call him in the Peace Hall a stag of 10. And I have heard from Brown, me, and Madame Bandenhouten and Jean Baptiste talk of coming to see you next month. He mentions the Pellets too. He says their domestic harmony is not the finest in the world, but in business they are doing on ne peut mieux, which circumstance he concludes will be a sufficient consolation to both for any little crosses in the affections. Why don't you invite the Peelits to Shire, Crimsworth? I should so like to see your first flames, Zoraide. Mistress, don't be jealous, but he loved that lady to distraction. I know it for a fact. Brown says she weighs 12 stones now. You see what you've lost, Mr. Professor. Now, Monsieur and Madame, if you don't come to tea, Victor and I will begin without you. Papa, come! The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.